energy system has become the target. The exchange in terms of their tactics. The attacks are aimed at the generation of energy and gas facilities. The system has survived. However, it has to be transformed from isolation to adaptation, adaptivity, technologies, and unity. On the way towards new code, we face not only global challenges, but also global changes. It is essential to implement new technologies and to involve strategic investments. It should be done to make our energy system viable. Energy Security Dialogue 2025. New DNA on the energy security is created here through dialogue, partnership, and common vision of the future. Dear friends, we are happy to welcome you at our Energy Security Dialogue 2025. This is the fifth dialogue, a small anniversary, so to say. Throughout the first year, we discussed life after COVID. The next 2 years, we started discussing our survival at the time of full-scale invasion. This time we have to talk not only about survival, but also about building the country which is able to produce a sufficient amount of energy for its recovery. We are deficient in terms of energy. The International Energy Agency recently has published a report stating that the humankind is going to produce and consume more and more energy. At the same time, we are striving for less consumption of fossil fuels. Therefore, it is important to produce energy at the expense of alternative sources. Ukraine is no exception. We have to go this path. However, unlike the countries of the EU, we have to accelerate our pace because we don't just have to build something new. We have to restore our networks, we have to demine our fields for facilities, and we have to replace the units attacked by Russian drones and missiles. And today we would like to talk where we are going to get the resources for this recovery from. Are we alone, or we can rely on some support? Can we expect that Russia will pay for over 20 gigawatts of generation, which it has already destroyed? Those gigawatts would be really helpful in our recovery. And unless Russia pays for this recovery, then who will? Once again, let's outline the focus of today's discussion. It's the experience of war. More and more countries take into consideration the war experience in their strategies. However, Ukraine experiences attacks on a daily basis. That's why only Ukraine can be an expert in protecting energy infrastructure in the circumstances of daily attacks. We are ready to share experiences. We are ready to share lessons learned. That's why this event is the dialogue between Ukrainians and their international partners. Today we're talking about security of Ukraine as well as global security, because the world learns lessons. I would like to thank our donors once again, due to which this event has become possible. That's the Renaissance Foundation and Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Many thanks to our information partners, to Energy Community, to Kyiv Independent, to We Ukraine TV channel and Ukrainian Radio. I'm also extremely grateful to the team of DiXi Group for preparing this event. They've been involved in this event for the past 6 months. I wish all of us a productive discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear participants. My name is Oleg Panyuta, and now I'm a host at the Ukrainian radio, and it's my honor and privilege to moderate the first panel of the discussion. Its title is Global Changes and Local Challenges. But before we start our discussion, I will make a couple of announcements for you. So, our event is being broadcasted live and this means that our dialogues are being listened to. At the same time, we are going to use two languages at the same time. If you need interpretation, please use the headphones, while the online participants may select the interpretation channel. Click on the globe button and then you will find the interpretation channels. Please select the respective language. And our event is being recorded, and hopefully those who fail to participate will be able to watch the event later on. We are holding this event in a comfortable room, and in case of the air raid, we can proceed to the well-equipped shelter. However, given the circumstances, we are not going to interrupt our event. We'll be monitoring the situation, and if anything really dangerous occurs, we will proceed to the shelter. And now it's time for our first panel discussion. We are going to ask questions to distinguished visitors. Welcome to the stage, Mykola Kolesnik, Deputy Minister of Energy of Ukraine. Good afternoon. Please make yourself comfortable. Vitaly Zaychenko, the chair of the board of NAEK Ukrenergo. Then Mr. Pasvaichunas, the Minister of Energy of Lithuania. He has to be online with us. And in the Soson, MP of Ukraine, the member to the Committee on Energy and Housing Utilities. A little bit later, Jeffrey Pyatt is going to join our discussion, representing McLaren Associated, and Mr. Riley, the DiXi Group's board member. He will join us in a moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, global challenges and local changes. As you may have seen in the video at the beginning of the event, Ukraine has become a country which requires protection of energy facilities. Due to the full-scale invasion, Ukrainian energy system suffered serious losses. At the same time, it showed that energy security does not work in its classical meaning. The war in Ukraine gives other countries the understanding of what we are facing with and what the European countries may face with when Russia decides to make the next move. So, Mykola, I have the first question for you. The majority of Ukrainians lives in a paradigm of living through a single day. However, it is not possible to live without strategic planning. So, what is your modus operandi at the moment? What are your steps towards the winter season? And what plans do you have for the energy system and energy network? Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, dear host. Thank you, dear donors, for supporting This regular event, Ukrainian Energy Security Dialogue, has become virtually a platform where we can discuss energy in the light of security. And several years in a row, we discuss the changes, we discuss the consequences and trends. It's a very important event. Many thanks to the organizers for this platform. Next, where are we now? What is our status and what makes us different from the previous years? I've been working in the ministry since 2016, and before the war, we had two main tracks of activity related to security. First, energy diplomacy. In fact, we implied the involvement of donors of international experience. And we, of course, were striving to ensure IT security. We had joint trainings with many institutions from the US, with the Department of Energy, with their units in charge of cybersecurity, and so on. It was as early as in 2017 when we developed our first so-called resilience plan, which is the primary element of the security, country security. This is a kind of a scenario or a risk study. We studied the risks which may affect the stability of the system, of the fuel market, and other individual subsystems. And let me emphasize, the war we experience now is a hybrid war because it is, so to say, non-standard. It was not anticipated even in NATO protocols. And then we also were planning to join the energy security studies conducted by NATO. First and foremost, we focused on studying hybrid threats, namely economic, physical disruptions, cyber attacks, prevention of diversification, limitation of resources, and so on. Ukraine's history faced many times with the artificial demand for fuel or for energy. Our fuel market focused completely on the post-Soviet manufacturers, and in terms of natural gas, for instance, we were highly dependent. So it was the element of hybrid dependence. And then the hostilities started in 2022, and some interconnected market segments were disconnected from the synchronized post-Soviet system. And the same is true for fuel market, coal market. Everything was oriented on new routes. We started receiving the resources from the EU countries or via EU countries because the Black Sea is blocked. And two first war winters were dedicated to complete reorientation or diversification of our energy system. The same is the case with the recovery. The first attacks were aimed at underground shelters, substations of Ukrenergo, production facilities, and so on. Let's compare the previous periods and now. The enemy applied sometimes up to 140 ballistic missiles in one round. But today the situation is totally different. The enemy now launches up to 400 modernized Herань drones and something like 40 ballistic or other missiles. And unfortunately, civil energy facilities have become the testing range for testing our protection means. The enemy, of course, increases the application of its radio-electronic means. So we have to compete all the time. We have to participate in this weapons race. However, here is the question, where are we heading to and what should we start with? Unfortunately, the majority of facilities were designed at the Soviet time and the selection of their venue was pretty simple. The majority are located on the lands which are not fit for agricultural use. For instance, swamps or marshlands. That's why we have the issues with the underground waters and stability of the constructions. This means that we have to come up with a totally different concept of the system modernization. We have to change the priorities for the system's development. Then, what else is important? While we are experience war, the world is developing in terms of technologies. And the consumption of energy is growing. The amount of fossil fuels, however, is decreasing. We are always guided by the consumption. There are household consumers, and household consumers are maybe used to gas or other sources of energy, and this cannot be changed overnight. The same is true for the transportation sector. In Ukraine, we have more electric vehicles. In Ukraine, we have by 3 or by 4 times more than in Poland. However, the question is whether we have the respective infrastructure, the charging infrastructure available for the consumers, for the users of those electric vehicles. Then we have to focus on industrial development. In Ukraine, it was focused on metal work, on chemical production, agricultural processing, and so on. This is also a big group of consumers, and for them to be competitive, it is important to adopt new technologies because it is really difficult to employ the technologies which existed before the attacks. So it's crucial to change plans for the manufacturers, for the production. We have to change the patterns of production. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that the electricity consumption, energy consumption will grow. But how can we actually meet this demand? Now we're focusing on decentralization of district heating. It is one of the trends, it's one of the elements of the community's sustainability and resilience. The state, the national regulatory authority, the local authorities, the communities would like to simplify the commissioning of the decentralized generation facilities. And the main impetus for this simplification is the availability of financial tools. Many thanks to the Ministry of Finance for developing a number of financing programs. There are programs, for instance, for being self-sufficient in terms of electricity. We have just added new tools to those programs. Today we have the program 579. It's one of the most popular programs. At the same time, we have the question about the sample. The limit is now 150 million hryvnias per one loan, and this is not enough, as we can see. So it's crucial to ensure availability of all the tools for the market to remain competitive. The technologies are already in place, and the final track of our activity is the resilience of the consumer. The state has to provide the tools, including financial tools, and the market responds pretty quickly to the electricity deficits. At the same time, the batteries have become very popular. In 2022, we had a discussion with Ukrenergo regarding some boiler houses. And the next trend will be metering and accounting for the electricity consumption under the circumstances of those losses. The internal networks experience currently overloads, and that's why it is also important to protect the internal networks. On the other hand, it is important to add the capacity. And the third track of our capacity, of our activity, that's diversification of our energy balance. We started some strategic processes willing to procure gas in the Central and Eastern Europe instead of Russia. It's the issue of the physical infrastructure. It's important to have infrastructure for transporting this resource to Ukraine from the Central Europe. And one of the main trends of Ukraine is the development of interstate capacities. Ukraine-Poland, Ukraine-Moldova, Ukraine-Romania, this is so-called vertical corridor. This means that we engage the existing gas transporting routes. And we also would like to thank our partners for the systemic support which has been provided since 2019. The European directives, European engagement in tariffs defining a very time-consuming process. However, with the support of this strategic partner, we have currently 3 additional PG terminals, 3 additional routes, additional capacities, and for us it's a question of the security, because the enemy then has to question itself where to launch the attacks. And they have now 5 entry points. This means that we have diversified the risks.
That the enemy may just damage a potential resource for receiving resources. And it's very important to make sure that properly created market conditions and transportation rates, even engage in private business. Here, me and my colleagues appreciate the ministry. We keep in direct communication and we receive systematic support. So LNG, so Southeast terminals, and Baltic state are engaged as much as possible to receive all the necessary resources for Ukraine. So that's how we ensure diversification. We don't know where we're going to buy extra capacity and how we're going to meet on demand. And aggregation of international support is an important track. And here we're at the stage when the Energy Support Forum has become a platform created by European Union, which literally operates under European rules for European countries, for European global producers. And here Baltic states play an essential role, even despite their systems are not that large. Nevertheless, they are one of the largest distributors in terms of support. So I believe that what we undergo right now and internal challenges and our development of our market, so for the future we can properly switch to a new technological scheme, because every transformer, every installation basically substitutes post-Soviet equipment with a new European equipment we're going to service together for the next 10 years, together with our partners. Mr. Mykola, thank you so much. And we have an amazing opportunity not just to express our appreciation to Ambassador Payet joining us online, but also ask questions to him. And one of the questions you also emphasized is that does Europe understand the challenges Europe is facing today? Because these are our shared challenges, not just Ukrainian challenges. We appreciate support of the United States to our energy sector, but is American LNG is going to become a magic wand to send Ukraine and Europe through entry points, through LNG terminals on one hand, and on the other hand, is America ready to replace, to substitute all the supply to Europe to meet European needs? And can American businessmen potentially become another shell company selling Russian gas to Europe?
It's a real pleasure to be. Thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm sorry I'm doing it remotely. I'm actually in Brussels today. And I want to start with just huge congratulations for the leadership that the DiXi Group continues to show. I was with Olena last week in London, focused on critical minerals, and it was a reminder to me again of how extraordinary it is that even in the face of these relentless Russian drone and missile attacks on energy infrastructure, Ukrainian civil society, groups like DiXi Group, the government, including Minister Kolesnik, who we just heard from, continue to focus also on how to build a future energy system that is cleaner, that is fully decentralized, that is more resilient, and is aligned with Ukraine's future membership in the European Union. I only have a few minutes, and I will leave just a couple of quick thoughts with you. First of all, on the question of what Ukraine should prioritize, I think it's been true really since the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022 that Ukraine necessarily has to do two things at once. Obviously, keeping the lights on, preserving the energy grid, maintaining heat during the winter, preventing a humanitarian catastrophe is the immediate priority, at the same time that we continue to build for the future. And you asked about how to approach companies and the Trump administration, and I want to make 2 points. One, I'm really honored to be joined also here by the Lithuanian Minister of Energy. I was in Vilnius, I think about 18 months ago in my official capacity. The leadership that Lithuania showed in our G7 plus energy support group was simply extraordinary, and I know it continues through to today. I think it's very important in the context of the political change in the United States that this G7 group continues to function under the leadership of Canada and others in order to identify the specific equipment that Ukraine needs. And I think we all need to be open, clear-eyed about the massive escalation that we have seen in Russian attacks on energy infrastructure even since October. It's the same playbook that began in 2022, seeking to dismantle the energy grid, to use general winter as part of Russia's military strategy. But it's much more urgent today, and it's more urgent in part because the United States is not providing the leadership role that was the case during the Biden administration. But all is not lost, and I think vis-a-vis the United States, there are two important points. One is that our companies remain very interested in opportunities in Ukraine. I see that through my work in the Atlantic Council, my work with McClarty Associates, the conversations that I'm part of every week as part of the US-Ukraine Business Council. I've just been here in Brussels today talking about the example of the DTEC Fluence battery energy storage project, which is a fantastic example of a Ukrainian company working with an American company to build resilience into the energy system. And I've been interested also here in Brussels to hear how that project, since its commissioning in September when I was in Kyiv, has actually overperformed its financial objectives. So I hope we will see that model repeated again and again. On the gas side as well, I know there are important conversations going on with Naftogaz. I was glad to see my friend Alexei when he was recently in Washington on his way home from the COP conference. But also I know DTEC is having similar conversations with leading American companies like Venture Global and others, working with some of my old friends in Athens on prospects for the vertical corridor. I think demonstrating the viability of that project, that corridor, as part of the strategy to eliminate Russian gas from Europe's energy system is incredibly important. And I think we should not overlook how significant it is that just last week you had final agreement in the European Commission on a full phase out of Russian energy next year. It's a really historic accomplishment. I would also spotlight, and I want to underline the importance of the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, which Prime Minister Pavlenko on the Ukrainian side and Secretary of Treasury Bessent on the U.S. side have led on. I want to emphasize 2 points there. First of all, this is an agreement that's not about the next 3 years of the Trump administration. It's about the next decades of the U.S.-Ukraine partnership. It sends a message to American companies that the United States is in Ukraine for the long term and that there are opportunities. And I think the real priority there is to translate that potential, those opportunities, into concrete deals as quickly as possible. I know that the team, the Development Finance Corporation, that I work very closely with, are strongly committed to that objective. And then the last point that I would emphasize here, and I apologize that I have to drop off immediately thereafter, is that as I look to the long term of Ukraine's future in the European Union and its future as part of the European energy system, the issues around reform remain vitally important. So in that regard, what Minister Kolesnik, my friend Mikola, is doing at the Ministry of Energy is of vital importance. What the Rada is doing is of critical importance, including the upcoming legislation on regulatory energy enabling issues. And then finally, what happens in the Ukrainian state enterprises, whether we're talking about Ukrenergo or what happens to the future of Energoatom, how Naftogaz restructures itself for the future, but really building a Ukrainian system that works for the Ukrainian people and is consistent with the goals that President Zelensky and Ukrainian society have so clearly articulated in terms of the country's future in Europe. So I apologize I can't stay longer. I apologize for not being there in present physical form, but let me assure you that Ukraine has a lot of friends in Washington who remain strongly focused on these issues. And I want to finish out again with just huge congratulations. Thank you, Mikola, for mentioning our work together during my leadership of the G7 Plus Energy Support Group, but also Minister Vaisianis for the incredible leadership that Lithuania has shown throughout the past 12 years of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, starting with Lithuania's leadership following the invasion of Crimea, and certainly every single day since the full-scale invasion almost 4 years ago. So thank you very much.
Героям слава, дякуємо, пане Паяд, за те, що ви сьогодні з нами. Дякуємо за вашу підтримку. Дякуємо за виступ.
Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you so much for your support. And I would like to give floor to Mr. Vitaly Zaychenko. A few days ago, I read in social media that today you described as a representative of God on earth, because depending on announcement made by Ukrenergo, number of blackout phases, duration of blackouts, people are planning their life. You know, despite the challenging situation, now the key task of Ukrenergo is to keep the system alive and running, make sure it's functional, and do everything possible so it's balanced and as much households as possible receive usual services, so we can at least avoid situations like happened in October 2022. But once again, tell us, please, what are some of the challenges you're dealing with right now? How did you amend your operations, take into account daily attacks against energy infrastructure? And finally, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen tomorrow? What is your vision? Thank you so much for your question. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude for organizing this essential event. Probably I would start with some of the challenges we are facing today, our energy system is facing today. Unfortunately, or luckily, these challenges are permanent and well known. If we remember what happened in 2015, because you remember that the war didn't start in 2022, war started in 2014. So in 2014 and 2015, our energy system faced the first attacks against energy infrastructure. These were not large-scale strikes like now, but strikes near the front line, near the line of contact that existed back then. And then, as Ukrenergo, we started to think how we can counter and respond to such strikes. What can we do in this all constantly changing environment? How can we ensure reliable energy supply to households and consumers who are located in the vicinity to the front line? Then COVID lockdown started. Unfortunately, people experienced lockdown, everything was closed, but the energy system benefited from it. It had time to change, to transform, develop new technologies, remote technologies, which later, during full-scale invasion, helped us to ensure continuity of our processes. Our professionals, even after evacuating families to safer areas, could continue the work from any corner of the world. We had operational staff, which of course must be on a shift and who carries the highest burden of responsibility. And we're doing our best to protect our people, I mean operators and maintenance teams. We have been always in touch 24/7 with dispatchers, with operators to ensure interrupted operation. It's a great challenge for everyone, but it's also opportunity for future development. Another challenge started back then, and the situation continues to develop. We understand that energy system is transforming and is evolving under the pressure of new technologies. So this challenge of innovation is here for everyone. Energy system is getting better. It's getting greener and less carbon consuming. Unfortunately, we had forced the decarbonization of the system due to massive energy strikes, destroying our conventional heat generation we have relied on for many years. But the system received momentum for further development, and now we hope to develop energy systems similar to energy systems of our neighbors. But we just have to operate under the pressure of wartime. Another challenge is a competitive market. It also happened after the start of the war, but before the start of full-scale invasion. The market transformed, the market evolved, and market conditions started to change dramatically every day. It continues today. Market participants have become more flexible. They understand where energy system is going, how to respond to daily price fluctuations. And in this environment, Ukrenergo, as a operator of our energy system, is also changing, constantly changing. We understand that energy industry is very research demanding. Therefore, we cooperate with many scientific institutions that develop new technologies and new knowledge for us. So system is getting more professional, more advanced. I believe me and my team are implementing technologies at a very high level. Moreover, I understand that top priority for us now during wartime is to protect our equipment and to defend our energy system against attack. So our company makes a lot of efforts to build physical defense structures for energy facilities. Ukrenergo is probably the only energy system operator globally who has invested so much into defense structures. It's a very expensive equipment. Of course, back in 2022, we were not ready to face large-scale missile strikes flying all across our facilities. Honestly, we were not ready for it. We lost a lot of equipment, but thanks to our international partners and donors, we have received enough funding in order to procure new transformers. Obviously, we could not install them in such vulnerable locations like we did, where they would face the threat of annihilation. So we launched a large-scale program involving donor funds and loan funds. It also engaged the recovery agency Recovery Agency is investing budget funds, and now over 50% of energy system transformers are protected and defended with humongous concrete structures which proved to be efficient against drone attacks. Moreover, there are many cases when such defense structures withstood missile strikes, ensuring integrity of the equipment. Unfortunately, currently, enemy is using not just cruise missiles, but multiple drones, combined strikes involving both ballistic missiles and drones, and we understand that the only defense against them are Patriot systems, and unfortunately we have only few Patriot systems in Ukraine in total. So we continue to look for potential solution. And what we need to do is to accumulate a backup stock of equipment. So we have our emergency repair stock designed to address so previously we had a backup stock to address the weather emergencies at most, but now when we're facing military risks with our partners, we now have triple stock of equipment available at our warehouses. We have well-trained repair teams engaged in repair and maintenance. With the support of our partners, we have received heavy machinery, thanks to which we can conduct repair operations as prompt as possible. For example, 750 to 330 kilovolts transformer replacement previously took around 3 months. European operators need 4 months in order to replace it, and now our brigades need only 21 days to do this work. It's very fast, and we're doing the best we can to make sure that after strikes, well, our team are mobilized, they operate 24/7, and of course we understand the nature of security situation. We receive information from our military about threats, and we immediately stop any works as soon as there is a missile hazard. But otherwise, our teams are working in order to bring light to the homes of our consumers. This is the key purpose, and we completely focused on it. But in addition to recovery and protection, we also develop our energy system, because we understand that one day the war will be over. This war won't last for 100 years. Also, there were some 100 years long war in the history. Nevertheless, this war will eventually end. So now we try to predict how the energy system of future is going to look like, what needs to be built in our energy system. I mean, transmission system, we're already building it, we are working on it. We're doing it through our own efforts, and we also engage contractors. We engage our European partners to dialogue so we can build cross-border power transmission line, because energy exchange is an essential prerequisite for our future integration into European market. It's a big challenge indeed. Therefore, we need to expand and enhance opportunities for our producers, for our generate producers and traders, to make sure that this energy exchange system is at a high level, because we understand that there will be some pressure. We need to build our export and import capacity. Therefore, we invest a lot of effort into development of our grids. Basically, these are some of our key tasks, the most challenges creating pressure on us, and we are doing our best. So we don't stand still, we don't stagnate, we move on, even despite this extremely challenging environment. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Now we also, so probably we could use some sun now in the winter, but we haven't yet learned how to chase away the clouds. Mr. Payet mentioned contacts with the Minister of Energy of Lithuanian Republic, and we have Mr. Ambassador joining us today, direct link with a panel. Please welcome to our event. And now you have a chance to share some of your vision. I know that today in Lithuania there is a state of emergency because of Belarusian balloons annoying the airspace and potentially creating a hybrid threat introduced by Russian and Belarusian Union. So I have a question. Right now, Mr. Vaichunas, can you predict, do you have a vision of this change in paradigm, how to protect critical infrastructure, and not just in Lithuania, but in Baltic states in general, or maybe in Baltic and Black Sea region countries?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And I really appreciate this opportunity to participate in this dialogue, in this event. It's really important to share the experience and to share the developments in our region. And first of all, of course, I would like to confirm our steadfast support to Ukraine, as always, and supporting by the equipments, and also we are prepared also to ensure the emergency supply support. But answering to your question, and thanks for this reference on the hybrid threat, which we are witnessing in the current months. And today, of course, in the government meeting, we have declared the state of emergency in the country. And the reason is, as you have referred, this is the hybrid threat from Belarus, as we have these meteorological balloons, which pose the direct national security, I would say, also to our airport, and also from the broader perspective. So this is really a concrete example, and also we are witnessing the fact that also we need to protect our critical energy infrastructure. We have realized that fact earlier. Also, we are learning the lessons from Ukraine, and also we really appreciate all this cooperation which we have on our TSOs level and the DSOs level. So really appreciate this cooperation and the experience which the Ukraine has shown to us. So we are learning from that. But what I wanted to say, this is really very important that this year, this is the year of the Baltic states synchronization with the continental European networks. And as Deputy Minister has said, this is really important for the security of supply for us, for our region. And we witness the fact that now we have very strong energy infrastructure, but we need to protect it. And the concrete element is that now we are working on the concrete program, regional program, how to ensure the resilience and the protection of our critical energy infrastructure. So the first phase, what we are doing on our national level, this is really the physical protection measures. We are calling this like a Lego blocks, which we are building, the first projects which we are building under the substations. And also we are learning a lot of experience from Ukraine concerning the protection, defense measures, and so on the overhead on the substations. The second element is, of course, the anti-drone measures, which are dedicated also to the electronic side and so on. And also we are taking care for the most important substations, that it will be ensured by the mobile forces in case of a need. And the third element, of course, is that for all these things, we need to be prepared for the repair, and also to have the reserves, how to change the pylons of the electricity, how to change the substations. So these critical parts also should be secured in the safe place. So here, of course, we are talking about the preparedness for the sabotage actions, and also for the events which could heavily damaging our energy infrastructure. And for that, this is very important that not only the national measures, not only the technical measures which we are already implementing, we have a very concrete program of more than 100 objects which will be also protected, but also we need the financial support. And I think for that element, we are raising this question together with Baltic states and Poland within the EU, that it's very critical and very important and timely to ensure the financing in the next MFF, next multi-annual financial perspective. And it's very important and strategic that EU should have the separate budget line for the protection of the critical energy infrastructure. Now this is time. This is not the option. This is really a very critical and important element. So we are raising, of course, our allies together within our region, not only, of course, the Baltic states, Poland, but also the Scandinavian states, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, other member states, to ensure that we would have the strategic financial view in the next EU budget. So concerning that, and this is very important, not only from the financial perspective, because we cannot afford this to finance only by the tariffs from the consumers, but also it would be showing very clear message for all the EU energy system regulators that this is also should be supported by the EU financial measures. And last but not the least, of course, it's really very important to have the systemic approach and the systemic view. And I think that the European Commission already made this in the EU Cable Protection Act, that we have to focus on the deterrence, detection, protection, and repair of our system. So every single element should be covered. And that's why this is very important to have this holistic approach for the protection of the entire energy infrastructure. And for that, of course, we are now extending this cooperation, and we have the MOU with Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And the purpose is to create the flagship project on the protection and resilience of the critical energy infrastructure. Because these things, these facts which we are witnessing also within the EU, to recall also the example of the Denmark, also the attacks of the drones for the airports in Denmark, this is only the question of time when we would have some sabotage actions on the critical energy infrastructure. And that we should not allow. So for that, we have to be prepared technically, financially, and operationally. So, and this is the most important elements. And this is the last element which I wanted to say is really about the support to Ukraine. As I have said before, it's very important and critical for this winter season to ensure the supply of gas. And here, of course, we are closely working with Poland. Also, I'm thankful for the companies in Ukraine for the DTEC, for the D-trading, also Naftogaz. We are in close contacts, and we have witnessed the first cargoes coming through Lithuanian LNG terminal already this summer. And just 3 weeks ago, we had the first cargo which has been purchased by the Ukraine company, D-trading, and the gas has been flowing to Ukraine through Lithuanian and Poland gas interconnection. And last but not the least, of course, we are looking forward to the next supply possibilities. Tomorrow, we are expecting that it will be the possibility to announce about some additional cargoes, and particularly the cargo, LNG cargo, which could be supplied potentially to Ukraine at the end of February. So the key message is that our LNG terminal also has some additional spare capacities to supply gas to Ukraine. And originally, this terminal has been dedicated to ensure the competitive gas supply to Lithuania and to our region, to Latvia and Estonia. Now it's also ensures the strategic flexibility during the crisis. And we are prepared to do whatever it takes to support Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll be looking forward to good news, and thanks for this unwavering support of the Ukrainian energy sector and the Ukrainian people in general. Many thanks to each and every Lithuanian. But please stay with us because there will be questions for you from the audience. And in the meantime, I have a question for Ms. Ina. We are fully aware of the fact that the legal and regulatory framework is the basis for the qualitative change changes of everything, including the energy system. Mr. Mercola has already given us a hint on the development of e-vehicles market. So it's just a part of the energy sector. So what is the vision of its development, and what are the prerequisites for the qualitative changes, upcoming qualitative changes? Thank you. Thank you for this question, and thank you for arranging for this event. Many thanks to DiXi Group, because it's indeed important to talk about the challenges we are facing with in the energy security field. Other panelists have talked about particular solutions, about the practical steps taken either by the companies or by the authorities. Yes, indeed, those steps are important, and we demonstrate serious, significant progress. In terms of the energy security, Ukraine has made a very simple step. It stepped away from Russia, from Moscow. Everything from Russia is dangerous and threatening for us and for Europe. This is the, so to say, zero level of precautions we have to take to ensure energy security. Yet, apart from the technical solutions for the companies, we need to have some political and economic framework of the system that will enable us to construct energy system in the protected way. So the question is whether we are approaching or approximating this system. And the key question is whether we have money to develop our energy security. We are definitely grateful to all our partners, to all donors who support Ukraine. Yet this is not enough. It's insufficient. We'll never be able to restore this system once we rely solely on the money we are provided, because we're running out of money. We are very grateful to buy it for supporting Ukraine on behalf of America, but the words of support are not enough to support Ukraine. And unfortunately, America does not provide any financial assistance at the moment. If at some point of time the war is over, I won't be sure that we will continue receiving money in form of grants that should not be repaid. This means that we need some private money within the system. Unless we have money, all those beautiful ideas on diversification won't work. We need an adequate system, appropriate tariffs, appropriate institutions, and so on. To avoid reiterations, I will focus on this element in particular. Let's cast a glance at the budget. It's been recently approved, and of course, the budget, one of the budget's elements is the energy security. In 2026, 42 billion hryvnias will be spent on subsidies. Plus 15 billion hryvnias to compensate for the difference in tariffs. Up to 200 billion hryvnias will be spent on PSO, special obligation, to fund the special tariffs for the population. Huge amounts of money which are spent on compensation for the tariff and inadequate tariff, which is inconsistent with consumption. It is important, however, to stimulate the agility, the savings. Instead of doing so, we provide additional funding. We do not make unpopular decisions aimed at raising tariffs. At the same time, we underfund the private companies that might develop the energy security system, that might invest in this production and so on. Those companies do not have adequate economic incentives. And the same is true for other sources of funding. Do we have an adequate business environment? Is business environment attractive? Do we have a stable regulatory environment? And nobody can guarantee that the business environment will remain the same in 5 years. Due to the war and partially due to other factors, we see continuous changes, and that's why the investors do not feel great trust to the energy sector. And let's not mention the Mindich Gate here in this context, of course, because it will be even worse. So we regularly increase funding to compensate for low tariffs. That's why we don't have sufficient money for ensuring physical protection or increasing energy efficiency or other steps which would be vital for us. At the time of war, we basically face with huge uncertainty. And it's not the government's fault, it's just by default, it's the reality. However, at the same time, the war provides us additional incentives. It urges us to develop new capacities, to construct new facilities, wind turbines, solar plants, and so on. We have some success stories. At the same time, we have some failed policies, like auctions for flexible capacities. And these fails are due to the design of decisions made. They just couldn't work for political interference or for other reasons. That's why, by all means, the current policy, the tariffs, and the green tariffs in particular, remit, still do not give positive signals for the market. So the market basically does not see any other motives apart from love for the motherland. This is not the way the market works. So we need other incentives to stimulate the market. And the next question is the question of efficient institutions. Of the past several weeks, this topic has been hotly discussed by everyone. Of course, I'm not going to touch on the corruption scandal in the energy sector. It's not the time and not the place to discuss it. However, this is again the sign of the fact that we definitely need efficient institutions. Any market requires adequate public regulation. We need an independent national regulatory authority and trust to the ministry, as well as trust to individual companies. Unless we have this trust, it won't be really easy to develop energy sector, and it will be complicated to persuade the partners to join, to participate, and so on. I work a lot with advocacy. I advocate for Ukrainian interests abroad, and of course, when you talk to the partners abroad, you never should say that everything is bad and we've got corruption and so on. We just say we have some problems and challenges, we are trying to address it, and you need to help us. Over the past several months and weeks, it's a very complicated task, because everyone says, of course, we support Ukraine, but you have to bring your country to the order, because we have to persuade our taxpayers that they have to provide money for Ukraine. So this is a problem as well. And another moment I'd like to mention, Mykola has emphasized on the global trend of growing consumption. This is obvious. People use more and more devices. The production requires more and more energy. Of course, this is logical. However, in Ukraine, we know how to live with the restrained consumption. At the same time, the logical trend will be to increase the consumption. In Ukraine, we've got a huge potential for reducing the consumption of the energy resources. We used to have bigger challenges with the inefficiency, especially in the heating sector. In the heating sector, we have from 25 to 40% of heat losses in some cities. So this means that our cubic meters of gas are very expensive. They are too expensive to heat the grasslands in the in the countryside. And we have at the same time very good examples of cities that are responsible in their consumption. And there are, so to say, anti-examples. So looking into the future, I should say that lots of work lies ahead of us. We don't have to be idle. We must work together, concert the efforts. I'm an MP from the opposition. At the same time, I don't want to differentiate between the opposition and the ruling party. It won't be enough to invest just in individual efforts. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your readiness to cooperate. Dear Alan, Ms. Anna has mentioned funding for modernization of Ukrainian financial system. Definitely, Europeans have this money, including the frozen Russian assets. We know that the Europeans at the same time pay to Russians more than they provide in form of support to Ukraine. And the question for you is as follows. Does Europe acknowledge the concept of energy needle or energy dependence? That's what Ukraine knows for sure. And how can Europe get rid of this energy dependence, energy needle, as we call it? Europe declares eventual phasing out of the Russian resources. On the other hand, the Hungarian Prime Minister has recently signed another agreement on supply of Russian gas. So is it really feasible that Europe refuses from the Russian energy resources? And does Europe acknowledge the essence of hybrid threat posed by the Russian energy carriers?
Thank you for that. Yes. Well, let us remember that when the European Union talks about how very little gas from Gazprom it now uses, it is important to remember that all those numbers represent not the impact of sanctions by the European Union, the United States, or the United Kingdom. It represents Gazprom's own decision to cut the gas flows themselves. So the reason why natural gas prices on the TTF reached over 340 euro per megawatt hour in August of 2022 was because of Russian action. I'll give you some sense of how crazy those prices were. The price for gas between 2009 and 2019 was between 9 to 29 euro per megawatt hour. So over 340 euro per megawatt hour was crazy. And that was because Gazprom systematically, from the spring of 2021, first of all, it removed the gas flow or reduced the gas flow coming across from east to west to European storages. Then it cut the supplies to European spot market. Then it refused to provide additional supplies to its long-term customers. It then took gas out of storage before the beginning of the winter heating season to lower the amount of gas in European storages. So the Gazprom-owned storages in Europe. Now, think about that phrase. What in the right mind were we doing allowing Gazprom to own storages in Europe? Those storages in the autumn of 2021 were between 5 to 9%. 5 to 9%, not 59, but 5 to 9% full when they should have been 80% full. And once the full war began, they proceeded from May to October, starting with Poland, with Olena, and finishing with Eni in Italy. They cut the supplies of every single long-term supply customer. So the sanctions were not imposed by the European Union on gas supply. They were gas withdrawals, gas cuts imposed by Russia. And that is when you talk about how fantastic it is that we now only use about 13%, 13% of our gas is imported from Russia, rather than 45% before the beginning of the war. That is reflective of Russian action, not European action. I think that is the kind of starting point when you look at all of this. Now, to be fair, there are some things which have happened. The seaborne oil trade has collapsed, and there is no more, and that's because of sanctions. And so to that extent, there may be some reimportation. That works. But the secondary set of sanctions, where we were supposed to reduce the price cap, to control the price of seaborne oil not sold to EU customers, but around the world, that has not been tightened and strengthened. So it gives Russians more leverage. And then we have the issue of the supposed gas sanctions. Whether they work, I think, is questionable. I mean, part of the problem, to be fair to the European Union, is you have got Hungary and Slovakia, which you may want to call in this concept less EU member states and more traitor states. But the reality of the situation is that they are working hand in glove with the Russians, and they have no intention of stopping their gas supplies. And because of the need for unanimity often in these measures, it's very, very difficult to deal with those. And to be fair, the sanctions have significantly tightened, or the sanctions proposed are significantly tight, but for gas flowing to Hungary and Slovakia. But there's a lot of potential there for doing more, particularly in relation to LNG and absolutely closing it down. These numbers which say, these regulations which say that the gas flows will be wholly cut, that LNG will be cut off, there are a sufficient number of loopholes. One has to question whether or not that will happen. So that all sounds rather negative, so I'm now going to try and be positive. Whilst it's true that more revenue has been provided to Russia to run its energy and war machines than aid has been provided to Ukraine, whilst that is true, what I think is different is that the fact that increasingly the Europeans are being attacked, whether it's drones over Brussels airport or drones over Copenhagen airport or sabotage, that begins to change the impression that it is our war as much as it is Ukraine's war changes the dynamic, changes the way you look at it. So I am more hopeful that the loopholes will be closed, but more pressure needs to be put on the system. Now, of course, the problem is that is only one part of the issue. The other part of the issue is energy supply. And one of the difficulties here is that Europe has, it's not enough to say we need effective sanctions. The other part of the argument is to say, okay, where is the energy coming from? And I think there's short-term and long-term approaches. One of the short-term approaches is to develop whatever gas resources, because we are still, whatever happens, we are going to need gas for a very long time. We need to develop gas resources. And that means looking at what we can do within the European Union, like in the North Sea. I don't think my own government is helping on this. They've imposed various windfall taxes which squeeze the ability of gas to be produced in the British North Sea, which is, I think, unwise, simply on energy security grounds. There are other domestic resources which we can develop across the European Union. There are neighboring resources, for example, in Algeria, which potentially could be developed as well as US LNG. All of that needs to be worked on, and we need to then work out where renewables can play a role effectively and how we get over backup issues. Now, I think some of this, for example, in Southern Europe, with batteries and the new generation of batteries which are coming on, which are much cheaper and easier to use with cheap solar panels, one can see that might work. There are issues about distribution with wind, but there are things but we have to make these things work. I think the other element, which I think is interesting, and I think for the future for Ukraine is really important, is about nuclear. So there's been one major development recently, which is actually positive. It's also British, but let me explain. So about a couple of weeks ago, John Fingleton who published his report to the British government, his nuclear regulatory review. And it's a brilliant piece of work. It is a piece, if you like, of intellectual acid on the system. And in that report, he basically attacked not merely the British, but the entire Western way of developing, of building nuclear power stations. He argued very compellingly that we have overregulated and undermined the ability to actually build nuclear power stations in at any reasonable price, in any reasonable timescale, and made a whole series of recommendations how to change that so we can build them faster, safer, and at lower cost. And I think quite amazingly is the British government, the Prime Minister Starmer, announced a few days ago that the government was accepting his recommendations in full. The consequence of that is the United Kingdom now probably has the most investable market in the world, the developed world, for nuclear power stations. And one of the thoughts I have is that in all the discussions about Energatom, and what you do and reform it, talking to the Brits and to Fingleton about what they're doing and how it would be possible to move post-war at speed, using some of the insights from the British regulatory review, might be worth doing. And I think on the other side, on the more broader European side, those insights can also work on nuclear power in all of the European countries to be able to do it faster, safer, and cheaper. And I think that is something which could help, because the issue with sanctions, really, dealing with the Russians' energy, is, as they say, with a lot of football commentators, it's a game of two halves. It's sanctions, but it's also supply, and we have to do both. And if we don't do both, we're never going to get there. And it's a joint enterprise. That is, it's between the EU states, broader European alliance, Ukraine, to work out how we do this together. I'll stop there. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Alan. We've been working for 70 minutes so far, and now it's time for questions. We have several questions from the audience. Please pass the mic. Hello, my name is... hello, I have a question for Mr. Vitali. A kind of old soldier. That's why I will not sing a song of love. So, the question is as follows. 18 months ago, our company participated in an auction for auxiliary services. We have constructed a power plant for 19.2 megawatts, but we won the auction, but for a year we cannot sign an agreement on connection. The power plant is ready, however there is still no electricity in the country and the situation is going to worsen and we cannot do anything about that. I wonder, what's it about? Red tape, bureaucracy, or something even worse? That's why I have a question. We spent 12 million US dollars, Ukrainian money, not donors' money. This money has been spent, but we still cannot connect our power plant to the network. But what is the essence of question? Do you imply the connection under the special auction? Well, please provide this information and we will examine it. Yes, it will be, I think, confidential. Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Yeah, my name is Vladislav. I'm the representative of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and I have a question to Mr. Riley. You have said a lot about the sanction policy. We see the recent updates about sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil. We see some actions against about the price cap in the European Union and in the G7 economies. Do you see there is still a potential to strengthen sanctions on oil? To limit the revenue of the Russian budget? And what do you think about the idea to sanction insurance companies, which is mainly based in the United Kingdom and European Union, to tackle the Russian fleet and to limit in this way? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm actually going to answer it from a different line. I've been at a number of security conferences over the last 2 years, and at every conference, when we raise the issue of what we can do about the traffic of the seaborne oil trade through the Baltic Sea, you always get everybody saying, oh, we can't do anything because of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and the Copenhagen Treaty, etc., etc. And I feel this is very much like the story of the Czech gold. So in 1939, after the invasion of Czechoslovakia, the Nazi Reichsbank approached the Bank of England, who was holding gold for the Czech central bank, and said that they would like the gold, please. And the Edwin Montagu, the governor of the Bank of England, said, well, I'm a responsible central banker, and it's very, very important to maintain the rules of the Bank of International Settlements and the rule of law. So he transferred the gold, which ultimately he was sacked some years later by Winston Churchill, kind of delayed consequences. But the point about it is this. What he was doing was he was taking a technical view of the rules and applying them in peacetime and not taking account of the rules, have they got to be applied in wartime. And so when there is crisis, your interpretation changes, and that's entirely legitimate. And they're not doing that, because all of the people who are doing the advisory work are taking the view that they're in peacetime. Their fundamental framework is wrong. And I'll give you, so when I've had these, so my argument is that yes, all those treaties apply, but you're entirely interpreting them in the wrong way, given where we are. And I'll give you another example on this, is that they say all of this, we can't do anything. But I say to them, if there is one single ghost ship, ghost tanker on the Baltic Sea, which runs aground and causes an environmental devastation, you will close the Baltic Sea that day to every single ghost ship. So when you say you can't do it, when you say you cannot do it, it means you can do it, but you won't do it, because you're not thinking the right way, but other things which are more important to you, the environment, than war and peace, you will act on those. So I think we can do this. We have done it before, and there's a great Greek word, metanoia, which is like a change of heart, a change of framework. And what we need is a metanoia in European policy, at least, to understand where we really are. We are, like Ukraine, at war.
Пане Олен, дякую за відповідь.
Thank you so much for your response. Okay, just another brief question. Yes, my question is very concise. I have a question to Ms. Inna. My name is Dmitro. I represent the City for People, a holding providing housing management services. Ms. Anna mentioned PSO and 200 billion. So I have a question. On utility services, now we have a challenge. We have a problem. The management companies all over the country are dealing with it. Distribution system operator, due to actions or omission by the National Commission, systematically overestimate the volume of energy billed from household consumers. It's not my personal opinion. It's proven in court. There is a criminal case in this regard, and by the way, Ukrgidroenergo joined our criminal proceedings as well. So I have a question. How do you think? What can we do with our independent national regulator in order to push them to actually do something in order to address this problem? Just a few figures. So 5 houses, 2 megawatts of overestimated energy. We lifted it, we removed it, but due to deliberately inaccurate statements, the actual subject matter of criminal proceedings, this decision was made. Ms. Inna, please. Well, here you made a logical mistake in your question. Influence on independent regulator. The idea that it's supposed to be professional, independent regulator, free of any influence, including members of parliament. But let's remember who's appointing them. Well, appointment procedure definitely needs to be revisited because effective appointment procedure obviously doesn't produce benefit we expect. So I'm not going to dive deep into details of this specific case, but I admit that unfortunately this problem with independence is not new here. Unfortunately, it's often ignored, and unfortunately when we communicate with our partners and representatives of donor communities, I've noticed that they very often have this technical and legalistic approach to regulator. You just need to add a word in the laws that they're supposed to be independent, and suddenly they will become independent. But obviously, regulator will become independent when they stop answering certain phone calls. Can it be done with efficient system? Well, with current system, I don't really think so. We have these commissions, we have this committee involved, and it doesn't work. I agree, it doesn't work. And obviously, we need to develop a different selection mechanism. And now, especially now, given what's going on, I think we have a window of opportunity where we can do it once. We can restart this regulator, reset this regulator with independent selection commission, with involvement of international partners who contribute to selection of potential commission member without any political involvement. Because I'm a part of Energy Committee, and I don't think that Energy Committee must be involved in this process, because Energy Committee is a political institution, it's political influence. Let's follow the principles of supervisory board selection. Not all supervisory boards work, but we have some very positive cases, such as Ukrainenergo, where it worked indeed. So we have some track record, we have a mechanism for selecting the most appropriate individuals. And unfortunately here, without involvement of international partners who have a moral imperative to do it because they invest their own funds, it's barely possible. However, it's a very appropriate and very relevant question. It's extremely relevant and timely, and I think now we have a political window of opportunity to do it, and I really wish that we don't lose this window of opportunity. Ms. Inna, thank you so much. We're sincerely grateful to our panelists. We need to let Mr. Vitaly go, and we need Mr. Vitaly to introduce new schedules. We wish resilience to our energy system, which is mainly Dear friends, now we have a challenging task. So now almost every second street of Kiev is a street of generators. You know, we have a generator street and regenerator street in Kiev, but now the most Kiev streets have generators. So now task Now our task is to talk about technologies of the future. And now, here at this panel, we have the brightest heads, the brightest people of megawatt classes that have something to say. It's not, we're talking about decentralized energy, right? So we prefer megawatts over gigawatts. But now let's discuss of what's waiting for us ahead. Because when we have decentralized generation roaring on the streets, we still have courage and boldness to dream and plan about the new generation of the future, decarbonized, decentralized, digitalized, and based on smart solutions. Now I will restrain myself because I don't want to dive deep into topics that generators are not really a smart solution. But anyway, today we observe global changes, renaissance of nuclear energy in many countries, and we wait when the new small module reactors will emerge. But let's start our panel with World Energy Outlook by International Energy Agency, where they outline three key scenarios. So we live in an age of creative destruction. Unfortunately, this creative destruction for us often looks like Shahed drones and Russian ballistic missiles. As the International Energy Agency takes into account these scenarios, miracles done by our energy engineers to protect the integrity of our system, and while on the other hand, take a look at global trends. And they try to forecast what will happen in our world if the policies and programs already announced will be implemented. And here, according to the scenario, before 2030, we expect a peak of fossil fuel. Scenario 2. All countries will fulfill their promises, including net zero commitments. And then, before 2050, renewable green energy sources will account for 80% of generation. I really want to believe in it because I'm a leader of an organization called Green Incubator. And third scenario is the most ambitious. Climate neutrality will happen in the nearest future. But there are some caveats to it. And analysts describe it as geopolitical instability. You've just seen this geopolitical instability when Parkover Center switched to its generator. Large northern geopolitical instability. Unfortunately, it exists. So geopolitical instabilities, as International Energy Agency's analysts say. So, how is it possible for these plans to come true or be disrupted by this energy instability? And our first question is to Daniel Wetzel, the head of monitoring of sustainable transition monitoring and International Energy Agency. And the question is for you. I will now switch. So please proceed. The questions.
So Daniel, two questions to you. Under the current pressing conditions of geopolitical challenges and, on the other hand, climate commitments, what the energy development scenarios International Energy Agency sees as the most relevant for European countries? And right after that, what are the technologies and policies, according to international energy agencies, have the largest potential for speeding up the clean energy transition without harming energy resiliency?
Thank you very much for the kind invitation, and it's a great pleasure to be here. So I'm going to share today some of the things from the recent World Energy Outlook that just came out. And this is an area the IEA has been looking at closely and working with its partners, both with Ukraine as a association country. Sorry, I'm fixing my camera, which seems to have gone off. With the Ukrainian government as a key association country, thinking through how these scenarios are relevant in the current context and how we can be most useful in close cooperation as well with the DiXi Group. The agency has also been very involved working with the European Union in its efforts to think about its energy transition, its securing supplies, and have fed into the recent announcement and great decision last week to end and phase out the import of Russian natural gas at the end of 2027. So the IEA is thinking about all of these things, both sort of the high level pictures of this and the very practical realities that we face on the ground. So I'm going to start with some of these larger trends in my intervention and then discuss some of the pragmatism that we have to take in envisioning this. So the recent World Energy Outlook, as you highlighted, looks across a series of different scenarios. And again, these scenarios are not forecasts. These are ways in which policymakers, companies, and other decision makers can view the possible energy futures we can see unfold. Across those scenarios, these range from things that look at a very pessimistic reading on today's policy implementation, as you said, some of the headwinds that we may see currently in energy security that may prevent some of the trends we've seen recently on renewables, batteries, some of these new technologies. One that is a bit more optimistic in terms of the delivery and timely delivery of some of these technologies to market. And then also our net zero by 2050 scenario, which is aligned with a 1.5 degree and really reflects sort of the highest level of ambition in terms of coinciding with our long-term climate goals. So across these range of scenarios, obviously things vary quite substantially, but there are a few things that remain true throughout. First and foremost is that the world remains thirsty for energy. Energy demand grows across all of these scenarios quite rapidly in many different regions, but none of them grows faster than electricity. Our executive director has heralded that we are very much in the age of electricity now. In the last decade, for every 1 unit of energy we added, for everything else, coal, oil, gas, we've added 2 units in terms of electrical consumption there. This is going to move to 1 to 3 over the next decade as we see air conditioning, as we see electrification of vehicles, as we see AI and data, and also all of our industries moving increasingly to electricity. I will talk a little bit more on what that means from a security implications in a little bit. But what we're seeing in terms of the meeting that raising demand, that this is going to be largely met by the huge and meteoric growth we're seeing in solar and to an extent wind as well in areas that are less sunny and also have good wind resources. This is because module costs have come down quite immensely, and we're seeing a huge uptake and year-on-year growth in the deployment of those technologies. And this continues out to 2035, both in our CPS and STEPS scenarios, which are our current policy assessments there. Now, of course, this is complemented by continued expansion of natural gas to be able to firm this up. Other technologies like nuclear, advanced geothermal, some of these emerging technologies do play a crucial role in firming up some of these things. But in terms of bulk electricity generation, these two continue to play a key role. And what we see is also in most recent years, solar and wind together absorbed around 60% of the growth in electricity demand. So this is already happening today, and this is a projection of those trends. Now, this, as we talked about, and you mentioned at the start here, we're talking about generation here. In terms of megawatts of capacity, we actually see across both of these scenarios, the need for dispatchable generation continues to grow. And this is very consistent across all technologies: coal, natural gas, hydropower, nuclear. But above all else, in terms of the growth there, we see, moving from around 2,000 gigawatts of dispatchable natural gas moving to around 2.5, a similar trajectory, although a little slighter for coal. But under today's policies, we see battery storage being the largest uptick here as the world sees those module costs come down quite rapidly, and there's increasing interest in these on a demand side basis for higher reliability, higher resilience, and this grows from around 0.2 thousand gigawatts or 200 gigawatts today to over 1,500 gigawatts by 2035. So this is a big area to watch there. These transformations also are accompanied by wider transformations in fuel markets. I won't go into these in too much depth, but there was in the last set of remarks a big focus on natural gas and the pragmatic ways of making sure that in the European Union, the phase out of Russian imports is really thought about in a very cohesive and resilient way. The current plans consider both a series of demand side interventions, electrification, but we do know that natural gas will be utilized by industries and in the power sector and in heating for years to come, making sure the security of supply is a key dynamic and dimension there. We're seeing already today the huge growth of LNG export facilities around the world, led by the US, Qatar, and Australia, that we're expecting by the end of this decade to have an overhang of export capacity that can be well leveraged and allow for this flexibility to make sure that security of supply can be delivered. So this is an important dimension as well. The last piece I wanted to touch on in this first part of the intervention is the importance for resilience. And this is something that all of our member countries and the work at the IEA has really come to the foreground. As I said, we're in the age of electricity. The consequences of electrical disruptions are oftentimes much more immediately felt and can have much more cascading economic consequences. In our scenarios around today, around 40% of global GDP is based on electricity in terms of its energy source. By 2035, this will move up to around 50% of GDP. And so this means that outages will continue to become more consequential, and this becomes a key watch area for this. And many of the interventions one would make to make electricity systems more resilient, whether it's hardening, faster response, the types of interventions you make are the same in many contexts if you are protecting against natural hazards, extreme weather, or malicious attacks. Many of these measures are no-brainers, and the IEA is really working with its member governments and beyond to think through what are the no-regrets measures there. Now, when we look at it today and trying to think about how people justify and look to make these investments, for most countries that are not facing some of the same situations that Ukraine is today, what is bringing them to the table is very much extreme weather events. The IEA tracked nearly 300 extreme weather events that disrupted energy supply, and this left over 200 million households in 2023 without electricity, and about 85% of those is focused on grids. So this has become a key watch area for whatever brings you to this agenda, being a focus on securing our grids, particularly with substations being a critical weak point there, or a very vulnerable point. We also see the same for cyber attacks, with the number of cyber attacks just in the last decade, based on our tracking, more than tripling. And that's only over the last 4 years. So this is two areas the IEA is really looking to advance going forward. Now, I think an important dimension is how do you think about these things in a schema, and the IEA is working to build a framework on this. First and foremost is that you are not going to be able to harden your systems to every form of attack. And I think this is something, or every vulnerability with extreme weather. And this is something that the IEA is really thinking about. What is the right frameworks for resilience that looks both at anticipation, prevention, resistance, and adaptation of those systems, but also recovery and response. And so this is the paradigm that I think many of the lessons learned from the Ukrainian experience are useful in a more broader context, and one that we've been very grateful for the participation in thinking through this agenda, and how in an international context, different actions can help reinforce that agenda. This includes things like stockpiling critical equipment, pooling emergency resources, and ensuring rapid restoration of essential services, and having that equipment on standby, whether that's LPG heaters or diesel gensets, whatever those are, making sure that they can be deployed effectively in these critical situations. So the IEA is working closely with partners to figure out how can the international community rally around this. this agenda, and also what are the critical investments that we say are no regrets measures, regardless of the threats you're currently facing, and how do we bring these more to the foreground? So we look forward to working more with our member governments, our association governments, and Ukraine on advancing this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you for International Energy Agency for being the, let's say, for paving the path towards energy progress. Подякуємо Даніелу аплодисментами.
Friends, a loud round of applause for Daniel. And now we're about to proceed with our honorable panelists who are here in the room with us. So I will first ask a question to Deputy Minister of Energy, Roman Andarak. Mr. Roman, sometimes I receive inquiries from journalists. Journalists asking me when it's going to be fine. What do you mean by fine? Like it used to be. Well, it never be like it used before. Well, so when we're going to see the light in the end of the tunnel? Well, I really hope that light in the end of the tunnel will never become our only source of light. But still, in our country, people often misunderstand our energy reality. There are these stock conspiracy theories about huge Ukrainian experts, etc. We have wounded and injured energy system. Some people, for some reason, condemn and criticize, requiring it to dance on fractured legs. Our energy system is in the survival mode. It's clear fact. On the other hand, we are facing the situation where electricity energy has become a premium product. On the other hand, if we talk about this continuum between recovery and building new energy system model, well, do we have resources, financial resources, human resources, and institutional resources, so we can not just recover damages, but also develop principles for new sustainable, decentralized, digitalized energy system, which is much difficult to hit than a gigawatt installation. Do we have this capacity to build forward rather than rebuild? Thank you. It's very important just to make sure that the light in the end of the tunnel is not the headlines of a train moving in front of us. And so I appreciate the invitation from DiXi. It has already become a good tradition to draw a bottom line on what's going on at the end of the year, just to understand our configuration and positioning, not just within the country, but on the international arena as well. So, Daniel, thank you so much for your report and presentation. I really don't want to describe electricity as a premium product because it's an essential product, it's a basic need. In a modern world, we have right to communication, we have right to network, right to heating. And we believe that every consumer must be provided with clean and accessible energy. And I would add here resilient, sustainable energy too. So when we talk about resources and balance between what we're trying to rebuild and what we plan for the future, here we probably have to rely on our three priorities. First of all, as you mentioned, it's survival. Survival has two elements. First of all, we need to protect what we have, and secondly, we need to repair what's damaged. If we talk about protection, then objectively, resources are very scarce. Resources are never enough. If we can protect key substations mentioned by Mr. Vitali during the previous panel, well, it's up to 100 core substations, but we obviously cannot protect 3,500 to 1,000 of medium voltage substations. It's impossible physically. It's physically impossible to do it in a short-term perspective. We don't have resources for it. Yes, we can prioritize, we can identify the most urgent things, but it's actually very relevant for the topic of this panel discussion. We need to, it's a constant race between arms and defense system. What used to be relevant 2 years ago has become relevant today. Something useful a year ago is not useful anymore because weapons system, warfare systems are getting better. They carry more explosives. New technologies are being developed, and here only in close collaboration with our partners, with some R&D institutions, civil society and academia, stakeholders involved in the defense industry, we were capable to do something.
Here, in the first place, the main issue is not money. We have sufficient resources due to the international support in order to procure additional equipment. Keeping in mind that the majority of facilities will be protected anyway. The current capacity is 1.6 billion euros. That's what we have to pay people who repair the facilities 24/7. The main issue is the time needed for manufacturing the equipment. It is really complicated to replace the equipment very fast. It is not possible to place an advance order for a 200 kilowatt generator in advance. And another issue is the human capital, human resources. We also observe that the repair teams and vehicles are more and more under attack. They can be easily identified, and we see that the employees are attacked. This is very cynical and this is very painful. These human resources should be preserved, maintained, and protected. In terms of the future recovery, here we focused, first of all, on the private sector. Unless the private sector, unless the citizens and the business are engaged, we won't be able to cope. It's very nice to see when companies realize this challenge. There are regular meetings with various companies, and at these meetings, the companies state that they take into consideration the recommendations given. However, they often face issues with connection or with permits, license, and so on. We try to address those issues, but still, it's a very pleasant cooperation because finally, the companies implement new technologies, gas piston generation, and so on. So we focus predominantly on the private sector now. And the resource, which is especially scarce, is currently the moral resource. We all feel the fatigue, and it's really difficult. And we really start forgetting that our enemy is the Russian Federation. Our enemy is drones and missiles. We are not enemies for each other inside the country. Unfortunately, we see lots of hatred, especially during blackouts. And with your indulgence, I will ask a clarifying question. The country badly needs each and every megawatt. You mentioned the private business. In your opinion, what else can be done by the ministry? What is the ministry doing for investors? Both Ukrainian and foreign companies should see more predictability in the regulatory field, because only then they will be able to implement the projects and meet the current demand, which is definitely obvious in the Ukrainian energy system. There are two issues. One is financial, another one is the regulatory one. In terms of the regulatory aspect, the European integration is the key to success. The European regulation has to be implemented. The Ukraine has to be connected to various balancing platforms and trading platforms. There is considerable progress in this respect. There is the respective draft law. It has already been adopted in the first reading, and hopefully it will be finally adopted in the second reading. Then it will be accompanied by the respective secondary legislation with a view to integrating our energy markets with European markets somewhere in 2027. Those guarantees will contribute to the confidence of private sector. Using this opportunity, using this stand, I'd like to say the following. The European Union discussions taking place today are our future. That's what we have to be ready for after we exit. So let's monitor the changes to adapt to them in advance. And finally, there are open platforms where the European regulations and other pieces of legislation are published. If you study them, if you see some risks for your companies, let us know. We will start the lobbying process. We have a cooperation with the European Parliament, with the partners, and thus we will be in the position to prevent or to mitigate those risks. So the channels are in place. Regarding the funding, Ukrainian sources of funding are not available. At the same time, there are public programs implemented for small and medium business, like 579 program, and there is a small program for household. There are some programs for supporting economy. At the same time, there are more global initiatives aimed at minimizing commercial risks. Ukrainian state has a D ranking, and this means that we have difficulties with engaging foreign funding. However, we have the agreement with the European Bank regarding procuring insurance for such risks. We are trying to ensure a more structured system. Then we will come up with the proposals that will be covered by some guarantees provided by the BRD or the World Bank. Hopefully the insurance mechanisms will be developing. Let's thank Mr. Roman and his team for all their efforts. And now let's discuss another very important structure in the Ukrainian energy mix. We've got the acting Director General of Ukrenergo, Mr. Sukhetsky. You know, I spent 20 years of my life in Obolony district of Kiev. And I always noticed that Kiev hydropower plant broke the ice or discharged the water balancing. So those are tangible results of your work. Ukrohydroenergo is a well-known company. At the same time, we often underestimate its role on the balanced market. At the moment, you are launching new projects. And under those projects, you play a role of the alternative energy facility, you also start working with the energy storage. What are the 5 or 10-year prospects for Ukrhydroenergo? What is the role of the company in energy balancing, and is this role changing? You are the, so to say, integrated player that combines classical, conventional, and green solutions. Thank you. Thank you very much for invitation. It's always pleasant to be in such a comfortable environment. First, let us not focus on the long-term time horizons, like 5 or 10 years. Let's focus on what we've got now. Our company produces up to 7 to 8% of energy balance. At the same time, we are accountable for over 70% of balancing. We have at the moment 98 power units all across the country. This system was developed with a view to balance the energy system, the water stock. We were supposed to control the floods and so on. So the company has to fulfill a wide range of tasks. For example, currently we control the water level in water reservoirs for the benefit of the water supply companies. We participate in covering for peak loads and frequency regulation. This means that we, to some extent, regulate the economy. Let me explain you in what way. The balancing market is not very successful, I would say. Every day we produce electricity for free, so to say. Today we produce the energy and then we will have to wait for about a year till we get paid. There is not a single company in Ukraine that can afford such workload or such regime. So other players are not ready to wait for 10 billion hryvnias to be paid later on. We are ready for this because we know this is not about business, about profit, it's about our reality. I wish Ukrhydroenergo could be engaged solely in a balancing market. I used to have a discussion when the hydropower plants on the Dniester, by the way, we are developing this network now. So the hydropower plants on the Dniester worked in the emergency mode. And then we sold this energy. We bought this energy and then we can use it according to our needs. All companies have to make some contribution to the economy, all have to meet some KPIs and so on. So we work on balancing very actively. 57%, our share on the balancing market is for about 57%, while auxiliary services that we provide account for 47% of the market. We focus not on the global production of the electricity, we focus rather on balancing. And thank you for reminding me of storages. It's a very long story, basically. Let me be frank. All other players construct those storages faster than we did. There are storages supporting each and every station, each and every plant. The war prevented us from constructing new storages because currently we focus on the recovery and restoration after those huge missile attacks. At the same time, we are planning to equip every plant with the storages of our own. We have a project for scaling the storages up. Of course, storages are not enough. A hydropower plant is a storage capacity by itself. We would like to construct a Kanyev hydropower plant, and we would like to extend the capacity on the Dniester. Such storages ensure reliability, sustainability, and of course, hydropower plants have a longer term of operation, and it's easier to restore them if they have storages. Let me share one thing. We have a small project on the Dniester. We are constructing an energy hub there. There will be the pump station, wind and solar power plant. The modes of accumulating energy will be differentiated. Those stations are, so to say, floating. You are going to engage wind and solar energy as well, right? What is our advantage? We've got huge facilities. All those facilities, every square meter of those facilities can be used for energy production. At the same time, we can also try some experiments. I will explain you what a pump station means. We install several pumps and they pump water from the bottom to the top when it's required. However, they have low capacity. For instance, 360, 350 megawatts. This is pretty much. If you have visited once our hydropower plants, you know what I'm talking about. But small pumps allow us to regulate the system. We provide auxiliary services. At the same time, we slightly change the balance in terms of the volume. Wind and solar energy can be used to provide energy to those pump stations. So this is also beneficial. Another advantage is that this hub is close to Moldova and Romania. This means additional prospects for us. Geographically, our power plants are scattered all across the Dnieper and the Dniester. The connection, of course, is specific for each and every of them. This means some stock of resilience, and now we are working on the distributed hibernation. Every individual hydropower unit can be isolated. Previously, the system used to work as blocks, as groups of units. But now it is not possible to operate this way. The viability of some power plants fully depends on the units. After multiple attacks, we learn how to switch from one unit to another. And let me explain this situation. We have our own funds. We have also loans for restoration, for protection. And at the same time, we work on important projects aimed at scaling our operations up. I also heard a lot about small nuclear power plants or units. So I recognize that this is a very powerful tool, and hydropower plants can be used for cooling, for protection. This means that our company can be utilized in many ways. It would be great, of course, to engage the private funding. And what about the access to capital in your company? Ukr Hydro Energy. What is the access to capital? Are you talking about our own capital? No. Can you attract investments? Are you entitled to loans? If it's confidential, let's just drop it. We always have a certain supply, a certain stock. Our company also participates in a special obligation scheme. We pay huge amounts of taxes. It's an open secret. Those taxes are reflected in our financial reporting. We have paid already up to 6 billion in taxes this year, and frankly speaking, the foreigners like this situation. They hope that sooner or later the special obligation will be cancelled. Then they will be able to provide us loans, and we will be paying the interest rate, and everything will be okay. We have at the same time the image of a very reliable company. We are predictable, we are open and transparent, and our budget is fully predictable. We are able to get loans, and sometimes we even can pick. As our Anglo-Saxon friends say, it's a nice problem to have. Thank you. Thank you, Bogdan. Thank you, dear team of Ukr Energy, Ukr. Thank you for your efforts. Hopefully, someday you will be able to discharge your water in a smoother manner, and you will avoid complicated situation. Let's thank the entire team of Ukr Energy. And now let's proceed to the mathematical or magical thing. Hogwarts lags behind, honestly, because it's absolutely amazing use of data and mathematics. Kirill Broshko from the Tech. The question for you, we are approximating the market coupling. What about your plans on this market? What is your anticipated role in creating a Ukrainian market characterized by liquidity? Thank you. Thank you for this question. First, integration of Ukrainian energy system with the European system yields serious results, and it produces an impetus to trading and their growth. At the moment, traders are the largest importers of the energy, of the electricity. Basically, this is their role. During the crisis situations, with the balance, they provide the consumers with the required amounts of energy. The traders are the bridge between the Ukrainian consumers and the EU. In parallel, the key element of the EU integration is the market coupling. It's the mechanism by which the price on connected markets is unified with the use of grids. Ukraine has to join market coupling, as it was mentioned in this year EU enlargement report, and basically this is our intention. Ukraine is going to join this algorithm for the day ahead and intraday markets of Europe next year. There are some technical, some regulatory issues. They still have to be addressed. But in fact, this will mean that we will join the club of the European markets. The price signals will create the impetus for creating the capacities, for constructing new capacities where they are most required. Ukraine is interested in such platforms as Nord Pool X. Ukraine is ready to play a role, a respective role on the Ukrainian market. Participation in those platforms is the sign of attractiveness. Before war, the Ukrainian market was characterized by high consumption. The consumption was manifold higher than in the neighboring markets. Moreover, this market was characterized by high level of liquidity. This means that the future prospects look pretty bright. So all this means open opportunities for long-term contracts, for derivative markets, for hedging the sales and integration of the portfolio. It is also expected that Ukraine's market will experience deeper integration with the European ones. Market transformation is one of the drivers for this process, because Ukraine is the largest importer of energy at the moment. At some point of time, it is also an exporter when the Ukrainian network has such capacity. So we have to be guided by the focus for adjacent markets. It is really important to have those focus for balancing our portfolio. Thus, the trade can be even more flexible and cross-border. If hedged, Ukraine can also trade in foreign markets, which is very conducive for the development of the internal markets. So I think that we should not start with smart meters, but with the deep, transparent market architecture. And such participants as traders can play the role of pioneers. I can, of course, argue with you, but we would need another panel. I have another question for you. Hypothetically, the nuclear power plants account for 40% of energy, and in your opinion, is it realistic to develop a market further towards the alternative sources, and what strategies can be in hand?
Well, Mr. Vysychenko during previous panels already touched this topic when he talked about this forced decarbonization of our energy system by missiles. Very rapid, unfortunately, very dramatic. And if we talk, well, the first 50% was a typical share of nuclear energy. Now, with this shelf of strikes and restrictions, we see sometimes the share of nuclear energy reaches 70% in our energy balance, while the rest is covered by Hydroenergo, wind energy, coal power import, and severe consumption restrictions. So in this context, forming or reshaping this additional 30 to 40%, which historically had been covered by combined hidden power plants with renewable sources, is a path we already follow, based on development of a structure of installed capacities and proactive additional installations of solar panels and wind energy. And of course, batteries as a mandatory essential element. Batteries are driving this development in Europe. They used to balance the intraday arbitration. Is it going to be 40% or 30%? I'm not sure, but we have what we have. Yes, this mandatory 10 to 15% of maneuvering capacities, gas units, to ensure certain reserves and covering peak loads. Of course, they won't go anywhere. They won't be able to get rid of them. But it's also important to mention that we're expecting critical 2040 when the nuclear reactors built during Soviet era reach the end of their life cycle. So before 2040, almost all of them are supposed to be decommissioned. So it's up to them how we're going to plan this new structure, how it's going to be supported, what kind of generation are we going to use, or what are we going to do in order to extend the term of operation? Are we going to build new modules? It's about existing projects, network upgrading, small modular nuclear reactors. We also consider them. So it's something which is very critical right now, because it's another essential element, not just energy independence, but also economic well-being of our country. Supporting businesses and supporting our defense capacity, because, as you see, energy is a crucial element of resistance. Yes, because drones are also flying all over. It's important, it's essential, and depending on how we plan it, we plan it already today, will determine what kind of market participant are we going to be? What kind of place are we going to take in the European community? And brief but very important question, because soon they will criticize me in minutes, but energy communities, right? Traders, do you actually believe in this direction practically developing in EU, or are you rather skeptical about it? We do believe in it. These energy communities actually an essential direction for developing this decentralized generation, as proposed by our legislator and by local communities during proactive strikes, because for some regions it's especially critical to have this cooperative model for businesses, for hospitals, for homeowners, organizations. it's essential for them to become a producer, to sell excessive energy on the market, to balance, to equalize the consumption profile. So it's a very relevant thing. But here, once again, we have to remember that we don't yet have a final regulatory framework. So probably next year we need to adopt the secondary legislation necessary to ensure our work, and we need to create incentives, and we need to offer funding for communities to pilot and offer this capacity. And as for iterating, of course, we need to optimize, we need to aggregate such communities, bring them together. We have been doing it for a long time as the largest balancing group in Ukraine. And now we're proactively building our own aggregator. We looking for assets, we add in forecasts, and we ensure stable and sustainable cash flows for investors, and easy to and understandable power supply for our sale portfolio. So now it's our business. We know how to do it. We use modern technical solutions, models for consumption prediction, balancing, etc. So I believe it's very interesting and probably one of the most important factors for development for the next 3 years. Thank you, Mr. Kirillo. We appreciate Mr. Kirillo for a very interesting, insightful view. And now we're about to move on. You mentioned you're the largest balancing group, but we have another huge balancing group, but on renewable energy market. So, NES Corporation. Probably everyone has heard about this group, and NES has become one of the first players creating aggregators and getting license, and now they're joining us, Director of NES Energy, Sergei Kravchuk. Sergei, welcome. Thank you. We're happy to see you. And we have a question for you. In the context of artificial intelligence, we all are reading this report, how artificial intelligence will bring trillions of dollars in investment into various areas, including nuclear energy. But let's take a look at the artificial intelligence from purely utilitarian point of view. So, as one of the champions in Ukraine in this area, what are some of the opportunities artificial intelligence opens for for grid management, for balancing energy systems, especially systems with a huge share of renewable sources? And on the other hand, I remember we once had this very popular term, intermittent renewables, and unfortunately, due to Russian strikes, we are now in the intermittent grid age. So how do you think does artificial intelligence ensure can support to balance unstable, damaged energy system operating under conditions of attacks? And finally, how to use artificial intelligence tools in order to ensure cybersecurity of such solutions globally and in a country which is waging the largest war since the World War II, the war for independence in Europe. Mr. Sergey, please, you're welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for having me. Actually, I just want to highlight that artificial intelligence is a consequences, as attempt to generalize the work of neural networks with this automatization. We have worked for 7 or 8 years in practical dimension. We have started to do it to forecast the output of our electric energy. We started with solar power plants, then wind plants, and then finally, as a consequence, and we're working in a balancing group, then we join these installations into a balancing group, and then the logical continuation of this logical group have become aggregated groups. So if in general, if we talk about the use of artificial intelligence for microgrid balancing, here we can divide this task into three core components. First of all, it's forecasting the balance in the network or part of the network, also to say in a local electrical system at the component level. So in order to make sure that the system operates, we need to predict two things. First thing is a generation. If we talk about the grids with high level of renewable energy, and another thing is consumption, because it's very difficult task to forecast the balance difference between pre-selected and sold electric energy, and as a result, plan certain operation of such micro network. So as a result, if we forecast it accurate enough, we can plan a certain scope of balancing capacities into this microgrid, into local energy system. So, based on what we observe, the step one is about use of artificial intelligence for planning and for building this long-term balance. Another important task, when we already have some balance, when our basic balance is already forecast, we need to take a look at available balancing capacities in order to meet certain electricity quality requirements which are supposed to operate in this grid. And here we talk about aggregators as a way, as a solution to one hand ensure balancing capacities, and it can be directly reviewed as an aggregated unit, which potentially may balance a certain designated areas, designated region, because we remember that aggregated group is more about an energy system in general, and it consists of aggregated units with certain territorial link. Moreover, artificial intelligence, and now we actually implement it in practice, allows us to plan and to distribute. If, for example, a team comes to distribution of energy or collection of energy, and then this resource needs to be distributed between several members of the aggregated group. At each and every point of time, we need to estimate and we need to plan specifically the level of charge, so we can activate two things which will provide best economy. Top priority. So our top priority is a technical capacity to generate this energy, to ensure energy output within the set period of time. And second is about teams. So we use only source electric installations which will generates the best result, both for activator and for owner. We want to have as much economic as possible. And now all market participants operating in the aggregation market have developed some mathematical models, definitely using artificial intelligence. I have no doubt artificial intelligence is used for this purpose. So after a new year, when we have a capacity to provide auxiliary services through aggregators, we can use our available resource as efficient as possible. So basic thing, use of artificial intelligence for forecasting and planning our regimes. And secondly, the use of artificial intelligence to manage flexibility and distributing resource. And thank you so much, Mr. Sergey. And now I want to get back to the cybersecurity topic. So on one hand, well, probably this is the first time when I deal with this reality. First time when I dealt with this reality was when I was asked questions to the colleagues from one of the largest player on the energy market. How do you experiment with artificial intelligence? And the response is we cannot do it. We cannot let our networks go online. It's clear and understandable But there is another dimension. It's a growing role of artificial intelligence in planning, coordination of cyber attacks. So how digitalized network can be protected? How artificial intelligence, on one hand, create key cyber threats, and on other hand, helps us to defend against them. I will start answering with the second part of your question. This is the use of artificial intelligence in order to model potential attacks, so-called digital doppelgangers, where the artificial intelligence imitates an attack against this or that network infrastructure, and most interesting, it develops during the attack. Very interesting approach, and we are already using it in practice. It's one part of the story, and another part of the story is a constant diagnostics of network using artificial intelligence. Here we talk about digital networks because we all perfectly know that in terms of storage and in terms of EMS systems, damaging demonstration of storages, well, all the equipment available in Ukraine is produced abroad. It's like a backdoor system where the manufacturer of this equipment can keep them. The system needs to be verified back at the equipment installation stage and further operation stage. And secondly, through artificial intelligence, we need to ensure constant verification to avoid any external interference with operation of equipment. We do such tests regularly. Thank you, Mr. Sengri. We appreciate input from our experts. So, see, these panelists are unlucky. They had a terrible moderator who delayed the panel 15 minutes. But it's an extremely important concentration of energy intellect. So sincere appreciation to our experts for their contribution into the future of the energy market. Thank you so much for being so generous in sharing in their insights. There are many things they haven't yet, they cannot tell for now. And now, unfortunately, we have to wrap up this extremely useful discussion, and I wish you good luck. We appreciate your effort, and we wish light every day, light for every house, and we hope that we're not going to talk about light in the end of the tunnel any longer, but the light will become sustainable realities, and we will and the word Q will be associated as only Q to TV show Glory to Energy System, and Glory to Ukraine.
We are going to talk about steps that have to be taken to make our system viable. We'll talk about investors and the signals they expect from authorities. Another component of our discussion will be unblocking the financial flows. It is especially relevant now at the time when we need to strengthen the trust to Ukraine. Dear colleagues, we are still waiting for you, and I'm ready to invite our distinguished panelists, Mr. Andrei Geros, the chair of the Parliament's Committee on Energy and Housing Utilities. The next panelist is Mr. Yaroslav Demchenkov, who is the head of international programs and projects at Oshad Bank. And this is the former Deputy Minister of Energy, by the way. Then another panelist is Mr. Andrei Barinov, an energy expert representing EBRD. Then we also have Ms. Anna Werner, the head of the distributed energy, representing the chamber, the American Chamber of Industry in Congress. And we have also the representative of the Florence School of Regulation, who's been the many-year head of the energy regulatory authorities Association. Another expert represents the World Bank, Ms. Silvia Martinez Romero. And another panelist is the representative of the Director General for Innovations, Mr. Philip Rosara, who is the head of Strategy, Policy Coordination and Urban Transformations. Thank you very much for being with us. This is our final panel. It is very responsible. We will need concentration of our efforts. So let's discuss what is still missing for us to invest, to attract investments, especially private investments. And the first question will be for you, dear Andrei. It seems that the international partners are ready to provide some resources, and there are also some public support programs. However, we still do not see the expected pace of developing distributed generation. What's going on in the parliament now? What initiatives are currently discussed in order to stimulate, incentivize the private investments? And what is the role of the parliament? What is the institutional role of the parliament in ensuring the confidence of those investors? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let's make our discussion more interesting from the very beginning. You made a statement. We unfortunately do not see the expected development, but what do you observe and what do you expect? It's a wonderful strategy to pose a question in response to a question. We know some statistics related to the distributed generation. We know some targets, some indicators. However, they have not been achieved as planned. So this is the explanation for my statement. Well, as far as I understand, you mean that less capacities have been constructed than expected. Well, let's elaborate. Maybe I have to declare the conflict of interest, or maybe I'm not objective. However, I believe that the pace of investment in Ukrainian energy is pretty good as for the country amidst of war. Last year, over 800 megawatts were commissioned. This year, nearly 1,000 megawatts will be commissioned. How have we arrived at those calculations? We imported the panels, we imported the equipment, and everything which was imported was installed. This year we made a breakthrough. It's 500 megawatts. And last year several hundreds megawatts were installed. I mean, gas generation. I'm not going to talk about companies that participate in this process. I do not need unnecessary disclosures. Nearly 800 megawatts are accounted for by the hydro energy power plants. And then we also will construct large storage capacities. All together, taken together, there is a very good picture. There is only one disadvantage. This generation is not in the position to function efficiently in winter. Here, in the first place, I'm talking about the solar energy. And on the other hand, the destruction, it is easier to destroy than to construct. as the saying goes. We have to respond to the market demands. And let me give you an example. The VAT draft and import duties draft. We know that the situation is not going to be easy. 1 year won't be enough to construct and restore, so there will be a 3-year program for gas piston generation and wind generation, and the companies will enjoy the 3-year tax exempt. It is much easier to fund the project when there is no VAT obligation. Banks are reluctant to fund the projects with no VAT exemption. In the second reading, I hope this draft law will be voted for. I mean, the draft law on green generation auctions. We are slightly changing the principle of those auctions to make them more active. Then there is also the draft law on active consumer, or this is a prosumer draft law, and every company will be able to supply energy to the grid. In terms of the solar energy, the distribution can be up to 80 to 20. So the consumers are trying to become prosumers. They try to be self-sufficient by means of their own generation, and then they can also sell their excess. However, let's keep in mind that it's winter, it's very complicated because there is no sun. But as soon as the day becomes longer, the situation with the electricity will improve. Last year the electricity was supplied on sunny days. There were no blackouts. The solar power plants are available in various regions, and it's a good example of distributed generation. As soon as we have sunny days, the situation of electricity will be better. So we are active. We do not overlook those problems, but we are trying also to maintain the dialogue with the market. We listen to the market participants. Basically, that's why I am here. I would like to get the questions and answer the questions. Thank you, Andrei. I highly appreciate your approach, and I see immediately that you have experience in parliamentary discussions. That's really valuable that you try to take into account the market position. The parliament is actively dealing with the European integration, of course. This is another important issue. And I would like to ask our next panelist about the regulatory practices. What practices are required to ensure transparency on energy markets? Such institution as Acer can support Ukraine in the policies harmonization for us to become the partner to this huge European market. Energy market and energy investment market.
In Kiev. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm terribly sorry I'm not able to join you in Kiev. Unfortunately, we are prevented from traveling to places which are considered dangerous, but I hope to be able to visit Kiev as soon as possible. I have only sort of understood part of what has been said so far because I had some problems with the English channel, but I think I understood the question. And I would be happy to share my views as to what would be practices to be used in Ukraine to try to attract investments and also to enhance the integration of the Ukrainian market into the European market, which I think is a common goal. I'm looking at the moment at the time once the aggression is over and when Ukraine will start rebuilding its infrastructure in a stable manner. And at that point, as always, credibility and predictability of the regulatory framework will be essential. There will be, I guess there will be a lot of reconstruction fund being available to Ukraine, but that will not be sufficient. In any case, I'm sure that Ukraine wants to put in place a conducive framework that attract investments in energy infrastructure. At that time, Ukraine will have to compete for private funds with the rest of Europe. And there is a massive requirement for Greece expansion elsewhere in Europe to support the decarbonization of energy demand and increase penetration of renewable energy sources. That's why it's important that the energy infrastructure sector will be regulated in a way which becomes attractive for investors. And it provides a reasonable return associated with a low level of risk. Because the energy infrastructure sector, if properly regulated, would be very attractive to investors. And we've seen in the past that especially long-term investors like pension funds and other investors taking a long-term view of their investment are very much interested in the energy sector. I understand that the Ukrainian regulator has been working to establish a regulatory framework which is actually aligned with the European Union standard. It's so that it could be a low-risk sector as long as it can sort of continue to be regulated in a credible and predictable way. In fact, I think there is one aspect, one risk that investors find it difficult to manage, which is regulatory risk. Investors can manage and can handle market risk, technology risks, operational risks. They find it typically very, very difficult to handle regulatory risk because there are no instruments on the market typically to hedge that risk. So the quality of regulation, the regulatory framework is particularly important. And in part, and I would say in great part, depends on the independence of the regulatory authority. Independence can be framed in different dimensions, being able to operate and take decisions without the interference of specific private or political interest, having a guaranteed budget allocation, which is commensurate to the responsibility of regulator, and also having discretion on how to use this budget within the rules of public spending and procurement. And also having an autonomous process for recruiting and retaining staff. What we want is actually the regulator should be able to attract and retain talented staff, because that is possibly one of the best investments that the regulator could make in order to increase and to preserve the high quality of regulation. I think the current law on the Ukrainian regulator seems to protect its independence, at least the way in which I read it. I know it faced a constitutional challenge, I think in 2019, but the law, as I read it, I think it's at least formally, it protects independence. We know that formal independence is not the same as de facto independence, and I have no way of assessing whether the actual independence of the regulator conforms to this formal independence. In any way, what is happening at the moment at a time of a war of aggression is of no indication of how the Ukrainian regulator would be able to function in normal times. But I think that it's been operating at the moment on the basis of a law that, at least in its reading, looks good. Independence clearly does not mean lack of accountability or operating outside the general policy framework, but all aspects should be designed in a way not to interfere with the specific responsibility of the regulator. Beyond the requirements of EU legislation related to the independence of regulators, I think good practices also has been developed in Europe, which could be useful in supporting a conducive regulatory framework in Ukraine to attract the needed investment. For example, it is a good regulatory practice that risks is allocated to the parties which are best able to manage it. And therefore, when it comes to infrastructure, usually at least two parties are involved, the TSOs or the investors invested in the TSO on the one hand, and the consumers of the system as represented by the regulator, the other hand. Now, I think operators, investors, and transmission system operators can manage operational risks, construction risks. They cannot well manage volume risk. The extent to which their infrastructure that they build, operate, and invest in are used. And some of the infrastructure may be used only for security of supply purposes. So strictly speaking, they may be useful even though they're not used at their maximum capacity, but that should not mean that the risk of an infrastructure being used less than the full capacity should be borne by the TCO and the investor. So this is, I think, one of the golden rules we've seen elsewhere in the world where this has been prevented. Private sector, private investors looking into the sector. When it comes to the future of Ukraine, obviously the future of Ukraine and of its energy sector is within the European Union, and therefore the priority at the moment would be to implement and to complete implementation of all relevant legislation to align the regulatory framework and the legislative framework for the electricity sector in Ukraine to the European Union standards. And if we focus on electricity market, I think the priority should be to join market coupling of the electricity market coupling in Europe. This would provide benefits in terms of security of supply in integration of renewables and also reduce price volatility to the benefit of consumer. The same would be the case with implementation of the Trans-European Network for Energy framework to support the development of infrastructure between the European Union and Ukraine, and eventually also within Ukraine. Now, the second part of the question is how, and I will conclude with that, how can ACER help or support Ukraine in implementing the EU acquis? There are some provisions which would be implemented already. The third energy package has been incorporated into the energy community acquis. I understand this happened with the ministerial council decision in 2022, and I think there is revision there that I think is in Article 6.2, that ACER may, in accordance with its own program or at the request of the Energy Community Secretariat of the European Community or in its own initiative, make recommendations to assist regulatory authorities and market participants in sharing good practices. So ACER could have a role, even within the energy community contracting parties, in order to share and promote good practices.
Yeah.
There is another example, which would be...
Sorry, Alberto, but we have to stick to the schedule.
Okay, fine. I stop here. Thank you.
I think we'll have the chance to continue discussions.
Yeah. No, I'm fine. I said all I needed to say. Thank you.
Many thanks. Let us move on. Так, давайте перейду на.
Okay, let me switch to Ukrainian again. Thank you very much for this attention to the topic of capacity and dependence of the Ukrainian regulatory authority. And thank you for mentioning the integration package, due to which we will continue the integration of markets. However, I would like to ask Ms. Martinez Romero. Of course, rules provide long-term confidence. However, rules alone do not guarantee investments once the market is disbalanced from the financial point of view. So, in your opinion, what systemic changes in the Ukrainian energy sector are crucial for financial robustness, and in what way the World Bank supports development of financial tools for Ukraine to implement energy projects, especially at the time of the uncertainty?
Hello, I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you. Go on.
Many thanks. So first of all, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And online with you today, and I've been listening to most of the day, and it is a very interesting event. So indeed, I think the bank has been always emphasizing the importance of deep structural reforms as one of the key elements to ensure that the private capital, to be able to catalyze private investments at a scale in Ukraine. And then, of course, there will be a specific support programs, but the structural reforms are also key. In particular, it has been, Alberto has mentioned some of these topics in the previous presentation, but sectoral governance improvements are key, and in particular, any reforms that are aimed to ensure governance and financial viability of the state-owned enterprises in the sector. Also, the gradual phase out of the PSOs, because this, in a way, perpetuate regressive subsidization and leads to lack of financial sustainability of these companies that, in turn, are unable to raise funds in any way, right? Even with bonds, or if there are these charges, this burden on them, it is unlikely that they will successfully be able to raise funds in any market, in the capital markets, nor getting any support from investors, right? So strengthening governance of the state-owned enterprises, utilities in the energy sector through better management practice, transparency, and accountability are a key priority. Also, ensuring the independence of the regulators and the TSO and the gas TSO continues to be key to build trust in investors and financiers. And also, very important to maintain the anti-corruption surveillance and enforcement, because the perception of corruption is a top deterrent to foreign investment in general, but also in particular in the energy sector. Then, of course, the second point is the integration with Europe, alignment with the EU acquis. The bank has been supporting most of the key reforms, and together with other donors and partners and the Energy Community Secretariat, we have supported with development policy operations since the unbundling of the gas sector, the TSO reforms, the REMIT law for market transparency. I think these are key reforms, and we are trying to support as well now the market coupling law. And we think that these are very important, because integrating Ukraine with the energy markets with the EU frameworks will automatically increase the coherence and the transparency, and it will align the standards. It will lead to gradual tariff reforms, and also develop, ensure that the legal environments and regulatory environments are more predictable, right? And this will attract private capital. It must be highlighted that significant progress has been achieved since the war started. And despite all the challenges, Ukraine has approved very, very crucial reforms, difficult reforms, and continues to do so even as we speak. Also, on the regulatory side, the regulator has been working on.
Sorry.
Sure.
you mentioned interesting point about gradual. Давайте українською. Ви згадали про
Sorry, I'll switch to Ukrainian again. You mentioned the gradual phasing out of PSO. How can it happen at the time of war? What is your opinion? You, as an advisor to our government, should see somehow this process. Is it possible? Is it feasible in general?
Well, it's, I mean, phasing out the PSO doesn't mean that you phase out the support to the SOEs or to the consumers, right? It's just a matter of making these subsidies more transparent and even more fair, right? By basically replacing them. I mean, I understand that during war this is complicated because there are a lot of changing subsidies it requires a lot of work and also requires a lot of, a proper household survey. It requires many things, which and also it may complicate the way distributing basically if for example the current PSOs are replaced somehow by some cash transfer program, this will require a lot of work, which during war may not be feasible, right? That's why we're speaking about a gradual reform. Some of these PSOs can be phased out or replaced by other tools, and others may require, maybe may need to wait until there is some kind of ceasefire or a more stable situation. But I think it's essential to make transparent the finances of the state-owned enterprises if you want them to be able to attract some capital, no, for critical investments. So this is what I'm talking about, and of course these are complicated reforms. So we understand this is not an easy thing to do, and this is why also we are talking about gradual phase out.
Many thanks.
Thank you so much. It's a very important discussion indeed. On one hand, we need to give this message. We need this clear message that we are about to fully phase out of PSOs and do market pricing for all categories of consumers. On the other hand, we need to understand our first steps and our next steps, especially now during the war time. So thank you so much for this important mentioning. Thank you so much for touching this sensitive topic. And because financial health of markets significantly impacts our projects. But sometimes there is a big gap between good idea and sustainable funding, and these gaps are usually due to technical preparedness, procedural compliance. And here I have a question to Mr. Andrei Parenov. What tools and mechanisms can potentially help Ukrainian projects to become more attractive? Because our project needs to be mature, first of all, and how European Investment Bank assesses these risks related to investments into Ukrainian energy sector. Thank you so much for your question. My name is Andrei Parenov. I represent Jaspers, the advisory service at European Investment Bank. We're based in Kiev at a EU delegation, and we actually help to expedite and prepare this new infrastructure project. Jasper structure has been here for over 20 years, and its purpose has been to support new members joining European Union, to build infrastructure as soon as possible, and expedite the implementation of infrastructure projects. Very good. The Jaspers has been in context of this credit line offered by a bank with the guarantees of European Union, 2 billion euros, in order to implement projects for project implementation. And bank has also received bank from EU4U and technical assistance. So these three essential components, they are key for success to expedite the entire process. It's very important to highlight that European Investment Bank is a climatic bank, also it's a climate bank of the European Union. So our energy program, in terms of energy program, bank is very interested in energy efficiency and renewable energy sources. It's our first priority, but we also fund resilience of the Ukrainian energy system. And last month in Rome, we signed an additional agreement for an allocation of this 127 million euro loan for procurement of natural gas by NEC Naftogaz. Actually, the bank has been really proactive in funding projects, the purpose of which is to restore energy in the future, and we take a look at this horizon. We need to know how to see it. And of course, another important matter is decarbonization and transitioning of state-owned and community-owned enterprises from solid fuel to biofuel to bioenergy. It's also a very important component, and I think this is a matter of our future. My colleagues are working a lot on decarbonization project in Poland, in Norway, in Cyprus. Many energy efficiency technologies are used, and they believe that this segment of the market has a future, and in Ukraine there is a good potential for it. Energy efficiency fund. Well, our bank also invests a lot because this fund has become a very successful case, and it's about energy efficiency needs. As for our project and as for preparation of our project, it's very good that the bank has technical support, technical assistance, and we assist beneficiaries, community-owned enterprises, state-owned enterprises, because regular feasibility study of a project is obviously not enough. Bank wants to clearly formulate the problem, and we want multiple potential options on how to solve this problem. This is how we do this relevant research to make sure that our projects are acceptable. We call them feasibility studies, so economic, financial, environmental, social analysis of every initiative. And the bank also identifies potential risks at each stage, whether it's project preparation, whether it's project implementation, and monitoring of project activities. It requires a long-term follow-up because the loan period is very long, over 10 years. Therefore, it's very important to make sure that these projects would exist, that they will be financially resilient, and of course the project must be climate neutral or positive in terms of climatic impact. Along with other financial institutions, the bank proactively collaborates with central and local authorities in order to expedite project development. And well, unfortunately, some other countries, such as EU member states, develop such projects, prepare such projects really fast, because public finance and investment framework is already harmonized. Therefore, they are really quick to proceed. They know banks' requirements, and they know criteria. By the way, all these requirements and criteria are well known. They are available online. There are handbooks and guidelines. And there are clear criteria to know whether this project may have a future or not. So for our beneficiaries, it's very important at the early stage of project idea, the project concept. So even before you start writing project proposal, so it's very important for you to have this understanding. Okay, capital is good, but what is my capacity? What are my human resources? Can I actually do it? Are we about to have this project follow-up service, project implementation unit PIU is good, but it also costs money, and you also has to do procurement. You need to somehow get access to this resource. So it's a holistic, comprehensive program. And we actually believe that our progress, this Ukraine's journey towards harmonization in public finance area with European standards, this alignment with public investment requirements will significantly expedite this process because there is a huge accumulated experience among our partners, other beneficiaries, and we believe that our Jaspers program and other donors, donor organizations, international financial institutions also join collectively to this process in order to make it faster. Mr. Andrei, just a brief question for you to continue this topic. We also need a bilateral movement, right? Of course, there are criteria, requirements, rules, and procedure. But how flexible the bank is in terms of simplifying some procedures for certain applicants, specifically from Ukraine, especially in the current environment when there is an urgent need to implement certain projects to strengthen our security. Probably it's supposed to be defined on a case-by-case basis. It depends on the project, it depends on its complexities, and we can consider derogations. But the bank always follows procedures. It's a law. It's a law for the bank. The bank cannot break its own laws. Nevertheless, thank you so much for your flexibility. We really appreciate it, especially when climatic bank funds procurement of fossil gas. It means that this flexibility is there. There is clear understanding of our energy security needs. And just to continue this conversation with representatives of financial institutions, I want to ask a question to Mr. Yaroslav. Do state-owned banks have this flexibility, because we have this gap between liquidity and needs of the market? What can we do in order to overcome this gap? Thank you so much for your question. First of all, I appreciate the efforts of DiXi Group, your wonderful, amazing team. You are a clear leader in this sector. I have known you for such a long time. We have worked together, and Oshad Bank is also a leader in retail, in funding small and medium businesses and SMEs. And over the last years, we have more and more focused on large corporate business segment, and I'm really pleased that energy projects these are meaningful projects, significant projects, are cooperating with our bank. But let's take a look at our history. Let's dive the history of this full-scale invasion. We remember 2023. It was an extreme year where we really felt the implications of energy strikes. We experienced first blackouts, generation was damaged, the distribution system, electricity distribution grid was damaged, and entire banking system asked itself a question: how can we help? We implemented some prompt solutions, and in 2024 we provided funding to gas distribution, distributed gas generation, various types of generations, and in our project portfolio, in our portfolio of energy project, we had 78% of this prompt emergency solutions, emergency repair, emergency fixes where necessary. This is mostly about critical energy infrastructure and supply of electricity. And I'm truly pleased that now in 2025, we have become more focused on systematic resilience. That's what the Mr. Chairman of Parliamentary Committee mentioned today. In our project portfolio in energy sector, we have 60% of funding accounting for mid-term and long-term balancing projects. So it's about accumulation, about batteries and energy storages. 37% account for wind generation projects, and we slowly it's a natural process, so we slowly reduce the share of distributed generation and we focus more on renewables. It's amazing because in 2024 in our project portfolio we had only 0.3 megawatts of energy storages. But now we have 220 megawatts. You see what a significant growth, and it's about to grow even more. If we talk about financial part of it, back in 2024, we founded 2.3 billion hryvnias for energy projects, and this year it's 5.5 billion hryvnias. And in our pipeline, we have 330 megawatts ready to implement project. We will continue to move to finance. Another amazing thing, since we're a state-owned bank, of course we work with our shareholder. Of course we fulfill the mission some private banks cannot pursue. And we also urge the National Bank of Ukraine to sign the MOU with National Bank of Ukraine on the support of energy projects by the banks. And today, the project was 1.23 gigawatts of new distributed generation have been funded, 1.2 gigawatts, and Ocean Bank holds a share of 30%. So today we're looking for tools of how to support distributed generation and support new tendencies and trends mentioned during first panel and second panel today in this scene. The reconstruction recovery will require additional generation capacity. The reconstruction will require most energy in the grid will be used for business needs and for people returning to Ukraine. So today we are already starting to fulfill these ambitious goals. We also see that our international partners are interested. They're interested to invest into new generation capacities. Our international partners understand that we have interconnectors, and Ukrenergo is going to expand this interconnector as part of NSOE integration. So we have a huge potential to play on NSOE balancing market, and within Ukraine we also need to develop our balancing market. And this is the reason why today we put this emphasis, we set these priorities, and we develop some financial instruments, financial products, so international financial institutions, IFIs, are attracted to enter and allocate their funding. And just to wrap up, another very interesting product is a consortium funding. Today, Ukrainian banks form consortiums to fund projects worth 150, 250 million euros. These are real projects, and these projects are developed by private business, so to receive funding from Ukrainian banks. But to make this funding more available, we obviously need more flexibility, more agility from our international partners. We need to engage additional technical assistance in order to reduce the burden, the debt burden on the borrower, and to develop more sustainable and more interesting bankable projects in our energy sector. And of course, we understand that the enemy escalates its attacks. Unfortunately, they destroy huge electricity generation capacities, and in order to recover, in order to restore it, we need not just funding, but we also need time, because such a huge energy object facilities cannot be rebuilt as fast as we did with our energy project with the tech. It takes at least a few years to restore such capacities. But nevertheless, the banks, along with international partners, I mean Ukrainian banks, work together in order to ensure sustainability of energy systems, to make our systems more sustainable. And small and medium businesses, larger businesses, today come to banks, and together we develop high-quality projects used by international experts as success cases, like just doing international panels. Look, doing business and raising funding is possible during the war, but definitely we need investments, because the investments are not just about profitability and return, it's also about predictability of businesses. And here it's really important to make sure to listen to what representative of Florentian School of Economy and what was mentioned by representatives of parliamentary committee during the first panel. We need a clear regulatory framework. A regulatory framework must be enabling for investors, enabling to invest money, because we understand that during the next few years, during the next few decades, nothing will change. The same independent regulators, the same policy, which is formulated in a clear and easy to understand way, like in the European Union. So in addition to funding, we need clear rules of the game, similarly to what is in place in European Union. And of course, military risks, financial risks are up to us. But we need to finish the Euro integration agenda as soon as possible. And believe me, as soon as we finish European integration agenda, we will have even more amazing projects and wonderful funding opportunity. Thank you, Yaroslav, for this good news about this pool of banks who can share risk, who do risk sharing, and who significantly raises this threshold of accessible funding, because we understand that it's a capital demanding project. And so you mentioned risks. There are military risks. It's all clear. Here we have to rely on our armed forces and support from our partners. But there are some other risks as well. And here I will ask Ms. Anna Kobernik to comment. So you present the interests of Western businesses in Ukraine, and probably you daily deal with some challenges, issues. So, what are some of the key non-military risks that may hinder the inflow of Western capital? So companies who are willing to develop, you entered the country during the war. What are some of the specific barriers you're facing, and what regulatory or legislative changes would at least partially remove some of these challenges? Thank you for your question. Yes. Thank you for your question. Hello, everyone. So for over 30 years, the chamber has represented over 600 companies operating in Ukraine. These companies have invested around $50 billion in the Ukrainian economy. And according to our most recent estimates, 91% of companies who are members of the chamber continue to operate during full-scale invasion. Moreover, around 200 companies have joined the chamber over the last 3.5 years. It indicates interest that businesses and investors show interest towards Ukraine. And we give daily discussions with new investors, new companies, international companies who are joining us and who are asking us, how are we doing? And they let us know that they want to invest into energy businesses. So investors want to work, but the most essential requirement for them is what Mr. Yasav mentioned, the stability and predictability of the rules of the game. It's incredibly important now for investors who are willing to invest their capital, so they need to plan at least 7 to 8 years in advance. They need to know that over this period of time, preferably during the project life cycles, this game rules are not going to change, and it can be 10 to 20 years in the energy market. And honestly, in addition to military risks, there is a huge regulatory risk, which affects the vision of investors who are looking at the Ukrainian energy right now. But also, it's also very important to bring new investors. But nevertheless, we also need to do whatever we can to make sure that investors who are already in Ukraine feel comfortable, because they continue to operate during the war, they continue to invest, they continue to create jobs and pay taxes. So They are, so to say, very valuable resource, most valuable resource, because their vision and what they see in Ukraine, what they tell to their international colleagues is extremely important. Indeed, they need to see progress, they need to see improvements, and therefore one of our priorities is supporting our existing investors who operate in Ukraine now. Another question to develop this topic. So you mentioned this predictability. And what can be a good proof of this predictability? Some kind of legislative requirement, for example, like in our case, like PSO, we have the stabilization agreement, which guarantees that the rules of the game will not change, at least will not deteriorate. Or is it something about international arbitration, because probably the investors not really trust our judicial system, or some kind of political commitment? So how these commitments to ensure sustainable regulatory framework is supposed to look like? Oh, well, yes, definitely. We do surveys among our companies, and 53% of our respondents prioritize legal reform, judicial reform, and legal stability. It's true. It's something common for all companies, for any company, any investor entering Ukraine. And as for energy, well, regulatory stability is also about a similar approach to tariffs, to make sure that tariffs are efficient and transparent. Investors are supposed to know that today they enter Ukraine with the rules of the game, and tomorrow these rules of the game are not going to change. They're not supposed to learn about changes after a year, that they need to pay something extra and make extra investments, because this practice is destructive, and the investors feel this lack of stability, and they're unsure about their investments. I can share with you another example. Of course, it's an eternal topic. It's a board debt on the energy market, which unfortunately are not going down. They're growing, and there is no solution to this problem for now. And well, these are poor auctions of broken promises. It creates disbalance for investors. Companies see it, and therefore the market has to ensure this kind of predictability. And it's also about price cap, which artificially limits income from generation. It's also something unpredictable for investors. What are going to be price caps? As it's all, it's about uncertainty, and it's distractive. Also, I would like to highlight the importance of liberalizing financial sector, because currency restrictions introduced in 2022, we understand why, to stabilize financial market. However, they created additional barriers for investors who currently cannot make settlements under contracts with international colleagues. And we see that our regulators at National Bank is working in this area. We are willing to support, to share our expertise in this area, because it's critically important for everyone. And another very critical point, please be brief. Yes, really brief. It's probably most painful for businesses is connection to the grid. Some companies who don't have a primary business in energy industry, but they install additional generation and they want to supply energy to the grid, then it's important multi-layered process, a lot of papers, and it makes it so slow that the project that were supposed to be launched this year will never launch. It may look amazing, the regulator's resolution, but when you go down to the ground where you need where you need permissions, it's already getting really complicated. The situation is really difficult, so you need to work on site. You need to explain the importance of this project, and you need to somehow bridge this gap, reduce this process. And currently, we're developing proposals, and very soon we will be able to present them to our stakeholders. And I hope that we will progress, because in our environment, it's critically important to connect generation as quickly as possible, not just to make sure that it's constructed by investor, but it's in standby for 6 months, while investor is handling this bureaucracy. So basically, these are my most important points, but I also have to admit that military risks are also very important, and military risk insurance, along with regulatory stability, is well, it's a combination of these two components. These two components may lay a foundation for engagement of new investments and for supporting existing investments in Ukraine. Thank you so much, Anna. Yes, we definitely need to continue our work with the regulator. It's also important takeaway for us. Maybe during the next conference, we will engage in the national regulator more closely. I hope they already will be relaunched and they will be more will operate in more reliable regulatory framework to ensure its independence. Meanwhile, Mr. Andriy had to leave us early. I would like to give him the floor, but let's move on with our agenda. And so, in addition to finance, in addition to financial terms, in addition to regulatory frame, an important role is innovations also play an important role, because thanks to innovations, we maintain the operation of our energy system, and we implement many important projects. And the previous panel was focused on development of new technologies. So here I would like to ask a question to Mr. Philip Proussard, representative of European Commission, who's joining us in line. I would like to ask you about the role of research and innovation in strengthening the resilience and investment attractiveness of energy sector.
What are the opportunities existing for startups in this respect? Not only startups, but also organizations involved in innovation ecosystem, especially in part of the programs funded by the EU.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me very well. Thank you very much for the organizers to give me the opportunity to say a few words. But before I reply to your very precise questions, I should say a few words about the Horizon Europe Framework Program for Research Innovation, which is our tool or instruments for supporting research innovation in Europe. It's actually the largest program for research innovation in the world. It has a budget of 95 billion. And I think what is important for your participants to know is that Ukraine is fully associated to this framework program for research innovation. That means that any university, any research organization, any company, any startups, SMEs in Ukraine can participate in all the activities and all the parts of the framework program for research innovation. And to help your organizations to participate and take advantage fully of the potential of the program, we have actually established an office, a specific Horizon Europe office in Ukraine to support the Ukrainian access to the program. So far, we have had quite a lot of success from Ukrainian organization in the framework program, in the sense that more than 63 million of euro have been allocated to Ukrainian participants. And there is much more to come, in the sense that we are finalizing our work program for 26 and 27, and we have committed more than 200 million for supporting Ukraine, particularly in the energy and the transport sector, which are the sectors I'm directly responsible for. And there are clearly opportunities in those sectors. Just to give you an highlight, there are a number of calls that will be launched this month, very likely starting tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, which touch upon the energy sector, like the demonstration of biofuel supply, solutions for off-grid storage, delivery of industrial CCUS. So I think these are sectors where there is a clear opportunity for innovative companies to benefit from. And to come back to your question about the role of research innovation to play in strengthening resilience and increasing investment attractiveness of the energy sector, we have to realize that a program like the framework program of Horizon Europe allows and helps Ukrainian organizations and companies to test and de-risk new energy technologies from flexible grids to clean generation and storage. By funding these pilots and by funding also standards development and collaboration with EU research networks, the program like Horizon Europe lower early stage risks and align Ukraine's energy sector with European market and regulatory practices. I think this alignment does not only strengthen the resilience during the wartime and the recovery, but also significantly increase the sector's attractiveness to international investors. Coming to the opportunities for startups, you know that with this present commission and the mandate of my own commissioner is clearly focusing not only on research innovation, but also on startups and scale-ups. So we are going to we have already developed a strategy for scale-up and startups. There will be a Scale-up and Startups Act that will be adopted very soon, which will detail the type of actions that we will be able to provide to increase the solidity, should I say, of startups and helping them scale up their capacity and their potential. So concretely, for Ukrainian startups, through gaining access to the EU funding like Horizon Europe, it will allow you to pilot technologies with European organizations and research institutions. You will be also able to benefit for programs like the European Innovation Council, the new Scale Up European Fund, which has been launched only a few weeks ago. And these programs and initiatives are directly relevant for innovative companies, which have the objective to reach market competitiveness in a fast and effective manner. So concretely, I think the participation to these programs like Horizon Europe from innovative companies helps them align with EU standards and value chain, making the solutions more competitive and investment ready. So I think in a nutshell, you will be able to benefit from the type of support that are made available to companies, particularly in the energy sector, that are relevant for Ukraine. And the programs that I mentioned, the initiatives that I mentioned, focus specifically on scale-up of the innovative solutions that are being produced and developed by those companies and in these research organizations. So a lot of opportunities available. Just to mention it, the work program for 26 and 27 that will be launched tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, as I mentioned, has a budget envelope of 2.2 billion just for the cluster that is dealing with energy and transport. So we are talking about huge opportunities there. And it's really encouraging also to see in the past participation of Ukrainian organizations. And I'm convinced that through the initiatives that we have put in place to increase the participation even more, there will be a sizable number of companies in Ukraine that will be able to benefit from our actions. I think that's all I wanted to say from my side.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, dear Philip. Yes, indeed, we have huge opportunities. They are open, and as mentioned by Mr. Philip, please watch the announcements. Next week there will be a new call for proposals on the Horizon Europe, and there will be more details about the dedicated programs. Now we have just a couple of minutes left for a Q&A session. Maybe somebody from the audience would like to ask a question. Yes, I see raise hands, and please pass the mic. Igor, over. Thank you. Thank you for this discussion. It's incredibly important. Please introduce yourself. My name is Igor Shtukonenko. I have a question addressed most likely to Mr. Yaroslav Demchenko and Mr. Andrigeros, however, he has already left. So this is the question regarding our integration with the European grids. Especially, I mean, the integration on the 21st chapter. The screening was finished in summer, and there were lots of questions posed to us, questions regarding legislation which we have to adopt in order to implement the European directive on a trans-European network. In my opinion, this time we might improve our investment capacity by making the respective alignments. Maybe Mr. Demchenko may answer this question. If my understanding is correct, you're asking about the legislation to approximate Ukrainian legislation with the European directive on the trans-European network. Well, if I wish to answer these questions, I would have stayed with the Ministry of Energy. I would not have left the government for the non-governmental organizations. Much more interesting to work here. If there is funding, then you can work there safely with the electricity. Honestly, I'm not in the position now to make any focus on the legislative activity by the parliament or by the ministry. You know, at present we are discussing the risks. Many things might have already been implemented in order to get patriots, in order to get opportunities for mitigating military risks. We need funding. In order to implement the acquis, in order to harmonize with the European legislation, we need to have common sense and political will. And that's important for the policymakers and for the decision makers and for those who vote for those decisions. Unfortunately, we are not always guided by this principle in the political environment. Therefore, the respective regulation do not penetrate our environment at a desired pace. Definitely, this would help our business. Definitely, this would reduce the number of questions from international partners, from internal investors that are willing to invest. Of course, this would be helpful. However, we all are aware of particular trends. Hopefully, we will be more efficient and the political will be more prominent in implementing those reforms. This will be very helpful for business. Okay, colleagues, you have time for some final remarks because we must wrap up. Yes, I fully agree. I just wanted to say very briefly that investors do have the money and do have the interest. We are communicating with investors. They come personally to Kiev from the US, from Europe. So we are we keep contacts. However, they are very picky about the projects that they would like to invest in. Together with business and policymakers, we have to concert the efforts. The energy should be the priority. We need to ensure political and regulatory stability. This will give the signals to new investors as well as investors that already cooperate here, and we are very grateful to them for supporting our energy. Thank you. Andrei? Thank you. Oh, I would like to make a proposal for DiXi Group. As a next step, you might arrange for an opinion exchange within private business, private sector, and decision makers should also be engaged in this dialogue. The sooner we start this dialogue, the sooner it becomes meaningful, the faster we'll be making progress. We need to define the priorities, and we have to visualize the prospect. Let's imagine that it's 2055. What system would we like to have then? And we should be guided by this vision. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues online. Maybe you would like to make some final remarks, some final comments.
Well, I guess I hope that next year we can all join in Kiev, even ourselves who are not online. And I hope that next year we will be talking about investment. And by then, Ukraine, we will be in a stable situation and would have finalized the adoption of the European rules and could be fully part of the European market. That's my wish.
Thank you very much. Okay, then let me wrap up this panel discussion. Basically, this is the platform for the dialogue. At least one of the platforms. We are not going to be monopolists. And we shouldn't be monopolists. We should not monopolize the dialogue. There are participants from the private sector, from the parliament. There are representatives of our partners. We have brought them together, and actually the dialogue gives rise to solutions. But what about political will? It does not exist in vacuum. Political will is created by some political steps or by voting. Sometimes those political steps have a very straightforward nature. When people take the cardboard inscriptions and go to Maidan, there are also some other measures. Of course, NABU and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office should not be on the verge of this process. So thank you very much for discussing the rules for the sake of predictability of investments. With that, I would like to thank all the participants, both offline and online. A round of applause for our participants. Thank you. And I'm ready to hand it over to my colleague, Anton Antonenko, for a wrap-up. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Roman. On behalf of DiXi Group and all our partners, donors, and sponsors, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to you for being with us, for entrusting us with this important intellectual discussion. Fifth time in a row. Hopefully, we will continue discussion of important issues. And next year, we'll be talking not about survival, but about accelerating the investments. So we'll discuss the priorities for those investments to secure the highest possible return of investment. Hopefully, Ukraine will become more interesting on the investment map of the globe. Thank you very much. Many thanks to our partners, to our donors and sponsors. But for you, this discussion would be possible. Many thanks to the participants online and offline. Thank you, dear panelists. We hope so much that today we created the common ground for further shaping this discussion, and we are looking forward to the next meeting next year. Thank you very much once again. Have a good evening, and I also have a request from the colleagues. By the way, dear colleagues, thank you very much. Due to their efforts, we managed to finish on time. So the request is as follows. Once you have been using the headphones for interpretation, please give them back before you leave the conference hall. And by the way, many thanks to our wonderful technical team and our interpreters. Thank you.